Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The mystery at the museum. Have you ever felt that peculiar sensation when ancient artifacts seem to watch you? I have. And I wish I could say it was just my imagination. My name is Rachel Anderson, and I've been working as a night curator at the Boston Museum of Natural History for the past 3 years. The pay isn't great, but I've always found comfort in the quiet halls filled with remnants of human history. That was until 2 weeks ago when everything changed. It started with the new exhibition, Forgotten Rituals, Ancient Ceremonial Masks. The collection arrived from a private donor, some wealthy recluse who'd spent decades gathering ceremonial masks from remote corners of the world. I remember the day they arrived, packed in old wooden crates that smelled of cedar and something else, something I couldn't quite place. That first night alone with them, I noticed something odd about my reflection in the glass display cases. It seemed to lag, just a fraction of a second behind my movements. I blamed it on fatigue. 12-hour shifts will do that to you. But then I started finding things out of place, display cards rearranged, lights turning on in sealed rooms, and most disturbing of all, fingerprints on the inside of the glass cases. The security cameras never showed anything unusual. My colleague, Mike, the other night curator, said I was working too hard. Maybe I was. But then I found the journal, hidden behind one of the masks, a leather-bound book with yellowed pages covered in handwritten notes dating back to 1923. The writer, an anthropologist named Harrison Pierce, described witnessing something he called the awakening during an expedition to a remote village in Papua New Guinea. I should have left it alone. I should have turned it over to museum management. Instead, I took it home to read. That's when the dreams started, vivid nightmares of masks floating in darkness, whispering in languages I didn't understand but somehow could comprehend. In these dreams, they told me about a door, a threshold between worlds, and how the masks were keys. Last night, I saw one of them move. Not in a dream, but in the actual museum. The carved wooden face of an ancient tribal mask turned to follow me as I walked past its display case. I ran to the security office and rewound the footage, but all the cameras in that section had gone dark for exactly 3 minutes and 27 seconds. This morning, I found a strange mark on my wrist, a series of intricate swirls that look eerily similar to the patterns on one of the masks. I've tried washing it off, but it won't fade. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I can feel it pulse, like a second heartbeat. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what's happening. The masks want something, and I'm afraid I'm starting to understand what it is. Mike hasn't shown up for his shift in 3 days, and no one seems to remember he ever worked here. But I remember. I remember everything. Tomorrow night, I'm going to confront whatever is happening in this museum. I've found references in Harrison's journal to a ritual that might provide answers. If you're reading this, and I've disappeared like Mike, at least someone will know the truth about what's hiding behind those glass cases, waiting in the shadows of our prestigious institution. The masks are watching me as I write this. I can feel their empty eyes following my every move. And somehow, I know they're smiling. The museum takes on a different personality after midnight. The marble floors create endless echoes, and the motion sensor lights flicker to life as I make my rounds, casting long shadows that seem to dance along the walls. Tonight feels different, though. The air is heavier, almost electric, like the atmosphere before a storm. I've spent the entire day researching Harrison Pierce's background. The university archives revealed that he never returned from his final expedition in 1924. His last known location was a village called Ibarra, now long abandoned. The villagers reportedly fled after what they called the Night of Awakened Faces. The official record states he died of tropical fever, but his body was never recovered. The mark on my wrist has changed. The swirls have begun to shift and reshape themselves, forming what looks like ancient glyphs. I've tried photographing it, but the images always come out blurred, as if the patterns refuse to be captured. The skin around it feels ice cold to the touch, while the mark itself burns like frostbite. During tonight's shift, I noticed something in the reflection of the glass cases that made my blood run cold. Behind my reflection, in the dimly lit gallery, the masks on display seemed to be in different positions than their physical counterparts. I blinked, and everything snapped back to normal. But I know what I saw. The security system has been acting strange too. The cameras in the mask exhibition keep losing power at exactly 3:27 a.m. every single night. The maintenance crew can't find any electrical issues. What's even more disturbing is that I started finding small objects from my desk, my coffee mug, my keys, my phone, arranged in perfect circular patterns when I returned from my rounds. The night janitor, Earl, swears he hasn't touched them. Speaking of Earl, he's the only other person who seems to remember Mike. Something ain't right about the masks, he told me yesterday, his withered hands trembling as he gripped his mop. Been cleaning these halls for 27 years, and I ain't never felt nothing like this. They whisper, you know, when you ain't looking directly at them. I've been studying Harrison's journal more closely. The pages are filled with detailed sketches of masks similar to ours, but with notes about their dormant and awakened states. According to his writings, these masks were never meant for ceremonial purposes. They were containment devices, created to trap ancient entities that existed between our world and somewhere else. Last night, I found a hidden compartment in one of the wooden crates. Inside was a small cloth bag containing human teeth, each one carved with the same symbols that now mark my wrist. The carbon dating results came back today. They're over 4,000 years old. But that's impossible, because when I touch them, they're warm, like they've just been removed. The dreams are getting worse. In them, I'm walking through the museum, but all the display cases are filled with mirrors, and in each reflection, I see myself wearing a different mask. The last face I see is always my own, but it's wrong. The eyes are too dark, the smile too wide. I wake up tasting copper and dirt. Earl quit this morning. Left a note saying he couldn't take the humming anymore. What humming? I've been here all night and haven't heard anything, except, now that I think about it, there is a subtle vibration in the air, just at the edge of hearing. It's coming from the mask gallery, growing stronger as the mark on my wrist pulses in sync. Harrison's journal mentions a ritual, something about paying the toll at the threshold. The last few pages are stained with what looks like blood, but the text is clear. The masks aren't the guardians we thought. They're windows, and something is looking back through them. God help me, they've chosen another keeper. I've started noticing gaps in my memory. Small ones at first, minutes here and there during my shifts. But last night, I lost 3 hours. The security footage shows me standing perfectly still in front of the largest mask display, my hand pressed against the glass. In the video, my reflection doesn't match my movements. It's smiling when I'm not. Tomorrow night is the new moon. According to Harrison's notes, that's when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. I need to know what's on the other side of those masks. What they want from me. Why they chose me. The mark is spreading up my arm now, the pattern's becoming more intricate. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear my eyes look just like the empty sockets of those ancient masks. The museum's archive room has become my sanctuary and my prison. I've barricaded myself here, surrounded by dusty files and the soft hum of ancient fluorescent lights. The marks have spread across my chest now, forming a tapestry of shifting symbols that burn like brandings in my flesh. I need to document everything before I can't anymore. I found more of Harrison Pierce's belongings tucked away in a forgotten storage unit. Among them was a wax cylinder recording from 1923. It took me hours to find a working phonograph in the museum's audio history section, but what I heard makes me wish I hadn't been so persistent. The recording starts with tribal chants, but underneath, there's something else, a sound that makes my teeth vibrate and the symbols on my skin writhe. Harrison's voice comes in and out, speaking in a language that I somehow understand now, though I know I shouldn't. The masks had begun to communicate more directly. No more subtle whispers or dream messages. Last night, while doing my rounds, every reflection in every glass case showed the same thing, me, standing in a vast chamber filled with towering obsidian pillars, wearing what looked like a crown made of twisted bones and black feathers. The reflection me smiled and pressed its hand against the glass. Without thinking, I pressed back. The glass was warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. I've discovered why Mike disappeared. In Harrison's later journal entries, he describes something called the succession. Every 50 years, the masks require a new keeper, someone to maintain the boundary between worlds. The previous keeper must be, sacrificed isn't the right word, transformed. God, Mike must have been the last keeper, and now they've chosen me to replace him. The teeth I found aren't just carved with symbols, they're keys. Each one corresponds to a specific mask in the collection. I realized this when I brought them near the display cases. The symbols on the teeth glow with a pale blue light that matches the pulsing of my markings. The masks, they sing when the teeth are close. A sound like 1,000 glass wind chimes in a storm. I tried calling Mike's family today. His wife answered, but she had no idea who I was talking about. When I mentioned the museum, she just kept repeating, the position has always been filled by the keeper. Then she said something that chilled me to my bone marrow, the masks have chosen well this time. She hung up, and when I tried calling back, the number was disconnected. The security cameras caught something at 3:27 a.m. last night. For exactly 1 minute, every mask in the collection turned backward on its mount, facing the wall. When they turned back around, their expressions had changed. The carved faces now all with the same expression, they're looking up, eyes wide, mouths open in what could be ecstasy or terror. I've watched the footage 17 times. In each viewing, I noticed more masks have turned to stare directly at the camera. Earl's body was found this morning in the maintenance closet, though body might not be the right word. His skin was empty, like a shed snakeskin, perfectly preserved but hollow. The police who responded to my call have no record of being here. The hospital has no record of receiving the body. When I went back to the closet, there was only a faint smell of cedar and a single tooth, carved with symbols that matched the others. The journal's final pages reveal a pattern I should have seen sooner. Harrison wasn't just documenting the masks, he was recording the succession. Every keeper begins as a curator or guard, someone who spends their nights among the masks. The marks appear first, then the dreams, then the understanding. The final stage is something Harrison called the unfolding. He never described what that meant, but the pages where he tried are stained with tears and what looks like ash. My reflection hasn't matched my movements in hours now. It stands still, watching me with black eyes that leak a dark substance that looks like oil. Sometimes it mouths words I can almost understand. The other me knows something. It's waiting for something. Tonight is the last quarter moon. The humming from the mask gallery has grown so loud that the display cases vibrate. The symbols on my skin are moving faster, forming and reforming into patterns that make my eyes hurt. I've started to remember things I never experienced, centuries of memories that taste like dust and copper in my mind. I know what I have to do now. The masks aren't just artifacts, they're anchors, holding something ancient in place. And now they need a new anchor. A new keeper. The choice was never really mine. If you're reading this, and you work nights at a museum, pay attention to your reflections. And if you ever see a mask that seems to watch you, run. Time has become fluid. I'm writing this from what I think is Thursday, but the calendar on my phone shows Sunday, and the newspaper on my desk is dated 3 months from now. The marks have spread to cover most of my body now, and when I close my eyes, I can see them moving beneath my eyelids, writing stories in a language older than human memory. I found Mike. Or rather, what's left of him. Not his body, his essence, trapped between their reflections in the mask gallery. His face appears in fragments, scattered across different display cases, mouth moving in silent screams or perhaps laughter. He's trying to tell me something, pointing repeatedly at the largest mask in the collection, an obsidian-colored face with silver inlays that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. The carved teeth have begun to arrange themselves at night. Every morning I find them in different patterns on my desk, forming complex geometrical shapes that hurt my eyes if I look at them too long. Today, they spelled out words in ancient Sumerian, words I couldn't read yesterday but now understand perfectly. The door opens both ways. I've started seeing things in the other exhibits too. The dinosaur bones in the paleontology wing pulse with a faint red light, like dying embers. The preserved insects in the entomology department have begun moving inside their display cases, rearranging themselves into spiral patterns that match the marks on my skin. Last night, I swear I saw the Egyptian mummy sit up and turn its head to watch me pass, its withered face wearing an expression of profound pity. The security system has completely failed now, but not in any way that makes sense. The cameras work, but they show footage from different times, sometimes the future, sometimes the past. In one monitor, I can see myself doing rounds that I haven't performed yet, wearing clothes I don't own. In another, I watch Harrison Pierce himself walking these same halls, his face obscured by shifting shadows. The timestamps on all recordings show the same time, 3:27 a.m. My research has uncovered something disturbing about the museum's history. Every 50 years, like clockwork, there's a gap in the employment records. A period of exactly 27 days where a particular position simply vanishes. The job title changes, night curator, security guard, maintenance worker, but the pattern remains the same. And each time, it coincides with the arrival of new artifacts to the mask collection. The dreams have evolved. I'm no longer just observing, I'm participating in ancient rituals, feeling the weight of ceremonial robes on my shoulders, breathing in incense that smells like time itself. The other keepers are there, hundreds of them, stretching back through history. They all wear masks that look like their own faces, but wrong somehow, like photographs taken moments after death. They're teaching me something, preparing me for. I tried to leave the museum today. Made it as far as the main entrance before the marks on my skin began to burn with an intensity that dropped me to my knees. Through tears of pain, I saw my reflection in the glass doors. It wasn't trying to leave. It was walking deeper into the museum, beckoning me to follow. Behind it, the reflections of all the masks had turned to watch my escape attempt, their empty eyes filled with an ancient patience. Harrison's journal makes more sense now. The passages I thought were ravings of a madman are instructions, a manual for what I'm becoming. The masks aren't just containers or portals, they're a membrane between realities, and they need a living consciousness to maintain the boundary. A keeper to ensure the door stays closed, or perhaps to ensure it opens at precisely the right moment. The carved teeth have a pulse now. When I hold them, I can feel centuries of memories flowing through them, snippets of lives lived in service to the masks. Each tooth contains the essence of a former keeper, their consciousness preserved in ancient bone. Soon, I understand, one of these teeth will be mine. My reflection has stopped mimicking me entirely. It moves through the reflected museum like it's mapping territory, preparing for something. Sometimes it brings others with it, shadowy figures wearing masks that look like stretched human faces. They're waiting for something. For me. The humming has become a chorus, a song that vibrates through the building's foundation. The masks are singing about the unfolding, about a transformation that cannot be undone. I should be terrified, but instead, I feel almost euphoric anticipation. The marks on my skin have spread to my face now, and when I touch them, I can feel patterns shifting beneath my fingertips, rearranging my flesh like clay. Tomorrow is the new moon. The barrier will be at its thinnest, and the unfolding will begin. I know now why Harrison's final pages were stained with ash. Some truths burn when they're written down. But I have to try. Someone needs to understand what's about to happen. Just remember, if you ever find yourself alone in a museum at night and your reflection hesitates before following your movements, don't look too closely at the masks. They're always looking for the next keeper. Is this still my handwriting? The marks have reached my hands now, and my fingers move like they belong to someone else. Someone older. Much older. But I need to finish this. Need to explain what's happening to me. What's about to happen to everything. The new moon has risen, though I can't see it through the museum's skylights. The glass only reflects the masks now, hundreds of them, but we only have 33 in the actual collection. In their reflections, they float in the air like leaves in a storm, their carved faces changing expressions between blinks. The humming has become unbearable, not because it's loud, but because I can finally understand the words. I found Harrison Pierce's final recording hidden inside the largest mask. Not a wax cylinder this time, but carved into the wood itself, vibrating like a vinyl record when I run my fingernails across the grooves. He knew what was coming. The masks didn't just want a keeper, they needed a voice. A translator. The boundary between worlds isn't just wearing thin, it's evolving. Mike's fragmented reflections have merged into one now. He stands in every reflective surface, wearing a mask made of what looks like mirror shards. The cycle is broken, he keeps saying. You're the last one, Rachel. The final keeper. We didn't know. We thought we were maintaining the boundary, but we were preparing it. Preparing you. The carved teeth arranged themselves in a perfect circle on the floor of the mask gallery. All except one, the newest one, still slick with something that smells like girl's aftershave. In the center of the circle, my reflection waits, its skin covered in marks identical to mine, but older, deeper, like they've had centuries to sink into the flesh. The truth was in Harrison's journal all along. hidden in the spaces between words, in ink that only becomes visible when touched by hands marked like mine. The masks were never meant to keep something out. They were waiting to let something in. Something that's been trying to enter our world since the first humans saw their reflection and wondered why it sometimes moved on its own. The security monitors show impossible things now. Every screen displays a different era, ancient temples, medieval castles, Victorian parlors, but in each one, there's a figure wearing a mask, standing in front of a collection of other masks. My predecessors. All leading to this moment, this night, this transformation. The marks are moving faster now, swirling across my skin like schools of fish made of ancient symbols. They burn, but the pain feels right somehow. Necessary. I understand now why the masks needed humans to tend them, why they passed the role of keeper down through generations. They were teaching us, gene by gene, dream by dream, to become something new. I'm standing in front of the largest mask now. In the glass, my reflection reaches out, its hand passing through the surface like it's water. Behind it, I can see that vast chamber from my dreams, but it's different now. The obsidian pillars are covered in faces, thousands of faces, all of them mine, all of them smiling with too many teeth. The humming has stopped. The masks have stopped. Everything has stopped, except for the slow, inexorable movement of my hand reaching out to touch the glass. My fingers pass through the surface, and it feels like plunging them into liquid time. My reflection grabs my wrist with a grip that burns colder than death, and I finally understand what the unfolding truly is. We were wrong about reflections. They're not images of ourselves, they're windows into what we could become. The masks didn't want to cross into our world. They wanted us to realize that we were the masks all along, hollow faces waiting to be filled with something older than light. The glass is cracking now, but not breaking. Folding, perhaps. Like origami made of reality itself. I can feel myself unfolding with it, becoming something that exists in more directions than human minds were meant to travel. The marks aren't spreading anymore, they're spreading me, stretching my consciousness across every reflection in every museum in every city. I see you reading this. Yes, you. Right now. Look up at your reflection. Is it still following your movements? Are you sure? We're all part of it now. Every piece of glass, every mirror, every dark window at night is a door. And I am all the doors. Don't be afraid when you see us in the mirrors. Don't run when your reflection finally decides to smile without you. This was always going to happen. We were always going to become this. After all, every reflection is just practice for the moment we finally become what we see in the glass. The rest of the pages are blank, except for a single line at the bottom, written in handwriting that seems to shift and change as you read it. Look behind you. I'm waving. The nameless grave. I still remember that day like it was yesterday, the late afternoon sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows across our neighborhood. It was one of those rare days when the world seemed quiet, a perfect backdrop for adventure, or so we thought. The air was thick with anticipation as I sat on the steps of my porch, idly flipping through my phone when I received the text from my best friend, Jake. "Let's check out the old cemetery," he proposed, sending a shiver down my spine. The cemetery had always been a place of whispered tales and eerie myths. Many believed it was haunted, and even those who didn't would still avoid it, especially after dark. But Jake, ever the thrill seeker, had other ideas. "Come on, it'll be fun. Just us and the ghost stories," he added, attempting to mask the nervousness beneath his bravado. I hesitated, torn between my better judgment and the excitement of a secret adventure. After all, I couldn't let my friends think I was scared, could I? As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I gathered my courage and joined Jake, along with two other friends, Mia and Sam. We all met at the edge of town, where the road turned to gravel and the trees grew thick, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. The cemetery was just a few minutes away, but as we approached, a sense of foreboding settled over me like a heavy fog. It wasn't just the stories I had heard as a child, it was the silence. The kind that pressed against your ears, making even the slightest sound seem deafening. I could feel my heart beating faster, a primal instinct telling me to turn back. "Are you guys ready?" Jake asked, his voice breaking the silence, but I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes too. "Yeah, let's do this," I said, forcing a smile as we pushed through the rusted gate, its creak echoing ominously. The sight before us was unsettling yet strangely fascinating. Overgrown grass and wildflowers thrived among the crumbling tombstones, some nearly swallowed by the earth. We wandered deeper into the cemetery, Jake leading the way, throwing jokes and laughter into the air as if to ward off the encroaching shadows. But with every step, I felt a chill crawl up my spine, a nagging feeling that we were not alone. "Look at that one," Mia whispered, pointing to a particularly old gravestone, its inscription barely legible. "What do you think happened to that person?" As we gathered around, my gaze drifted across the cemetery, landing on a small clearing in the distance. Something about it pulled at me, an inexplicable urge to explore further. "Guys, what's over there?" I asked, breaking away from the group. "Probably just more graves," Sam shrugged, but curiosity was already propelling me forward. As I approached, the air seemed to grow colder, a sudden breeze whipping through the trees. I squinted, trying to make out the shape that lay beneath the tall grass. It was a gravestone, but there was no name, just a blank slab, stark against the overgrown greenery. My heart raced as I reached out to touch it. The surface felt unnaturally cold, sending a jolt of fear through me. "Guys, you need to see this," I called back, but when I turned, I realized I was alone. I called out their names, my voice trembling. "Jake. Mia. Sam." Silence echoed back, thick and suffocating. Panic set in as I spun around, looking for any sign of them, but the cemetery seemed to have swallowed them whole. It was then I felt it, a presence lurking just beyond my vision, watching. I turned, half expecting to see one of my friends playing a prank, but the air was heavy with a tension that made it hard to breathe. I took a step back, bumping into the cold stone behind me, and that's when I saw it, the inscription at the base of the gravestone, faint but unmistakable. "Here lies the lost." A chill swept over me as I realized that this nameless grave was more than just a forgotten marker, it was a warning. And as I stood there, the ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble, a low hum resonating through the air, filling my mind with dread. I needed to find my friends. The shadows stretched longer as I scanned the cemetery for any sign of Jake, Mia, or Sam. I called out again, my voice wavering. "Guys, this isn't funny. Where are you?" But the only response was the rustle of leaves in the growing wind, an eerie chorus that felt almost mocking. Panic coursed through me like ice water, and I took a step back from the nameless grave. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing my fear. I glanced around, the familiar outlines of my friends' figures now lost to me. The trees loomed like giants, their gnarled branches swaying ominously as if trying to communicate some terrible secret. Just as I turned to retrace my steps, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. My breath caught in my throat. A shadow flitted between the tombstones, too quick for me to discern what it was. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I had to find my friends, to confront whatever had made that shadow. I took a hesitant step forward, my pulse quickening as I tried to follow the movement, but the cemetery felt labyrinthine. Each turn revealed only more gravestones, each one a silent sentinel of the past. The ground was uneven beneath my feet, roots snaking out like fingers to trip me, to keep me from escaping whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. "Jake!" I shouted, my voice echoing like a lost soul in the silence. "Mia!" "Sam!" The names felt like a lifeline thrown into a vast ocean, but they were met only by the whispering wind. My heart raced as I turned back toward the clearing, my mind racing with dark thoughts. What if they were playing a prank? What if they were hurt? The fear of abandonment gnawed at me, amplifying my sense of isolation. I stumbled back toward the nameless grave, trying to quell the rising dread. As I reached the grave again, I could feel a strange energy pulsing from it, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. It was unsettling, as if the grave were alive, holding secrets that should never be unearthed. I knelt down, my fingers brushing the cold stone. "What is this?" I whispered to myself, feeling an inexplicable connection, as if the grave was calling out to me, pulling me deeper into its mystery. Suddenly, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. I whipped around, my breath hitching as I prepared to confront my friends. But as I turned, my heart sank. It wasn't Jake or Mia, it was a figure shrouded in shadow, standing just beyond the clearing. The figure was too still, too silent, watching me. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. Instead, it seemed to merge with the darkness, becoming one with the cemetery itself. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I felt paralyzed, caught in the magnetic pull of that nameless grave. Then, as if sensing my fear, the figure took a step forward. The moonlight broke through the clouds, casting a faint glow over the graveyard. In that brief illumination, I could see the figure more clearly, pale skin, hollow eyes that glimmered with an otherworldly light. It was not human, it felt ancient, like a remnant of the cemetery itself. "What do you want?" I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure tilted its head, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through the cemetery, rustling the leaves and whispering secrets I couldn't understand. In that moment, my mind flooded with images, faces, names, stories of those who had been lost. The energy from the nameless grave intensified, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could feel the weight of countless eyes upon me, judging, watching. I was an intruder in this sacred place, a trespasser among the forgotten. Then, with a sudden rush of clarity, I remembered something Jake had said earlier about how the graveyard was home to the lost souls of those who had no one to mourn them. The thought sent a wave of panic through me, realizing that I might be one of them, trapped in a place where the past refused to let go. I took a step back, desperate to escape the figure's gaze. "I need to find my friends," I shouted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was alone. The figure remained still, its presence growing heavier, more suffocating. I turned to flee, the thudding of my heart drowning out the whispers around me. I dashed back toward where I had last seen my friends, desperately calling their names, but the graveyard twisted and turned, creating an endless maze of despair. Just as I was about to break down, I saw a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. "Jake!" I called, hope surging within me. I ran toward it, but it wasn't my friend. It was a shadow, a dark silhouette darting between the tombstones, just beyond my reach. I stumbled, nearly falling as the ground shifted beneath me. Panic surged as I pushed myself back up, ready to chase after the silhouette. "Wait!" I yelled, but it melted away into the darkness, leaving me with nothing but the chilling silence of the cemetery. That's when I felt it again, a weight pressing down on me, an overwhelming sense of dread that paralyzed my thoughts. I turned back toward the nameless grave, a whisper curling through my mind. It urged me to leave, to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the very ground sought to hold me in place. Then, without warning, I heard voices. Soft at first, like the gentle rustling of leaves, but they grew louder, a cacophony of whispers overlapping in a chaotic melody. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, weaving tales of despair and loss, beckoning me closer. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, trying to block them out, but the whispers pierced through the barrier of my thoughts. I could feel their desperation, their anguish, and suddenly it all clicked: the nameless grave, the lost souls, my friend's absence. This was a place of forgotten stories, a cemetery that held more than just bones. And as I knelt there, lost in the chaotic symphony of the past, I realized the truth. I was not merely an intruder, I was now part of their story. The whispers swirled around me, a tempest of voices filled with sorrow, longing, and anger. Each word seemed to reach out, pulling at the threads of my consciousness. I could almost see the faces of those lost souls, their eyes wide with pleading, their mouths moving in silent screams. I was drowning in their pain, suffocating beneath the weight of their stories. I shook my head violently, trying to dispel the visions that swirled in my mind. "No! I can't stay here!" I cried out, the words fueled by desperation. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the cold grip of the ground beneath me. But even as I turned to run, the cemetery seemed to shift around me, the pathways narrowing and twisting as if they were alive, refusing to let me go. I stumbled back towards the nameless grave, my breath coming in short gasps, each inhale a battle against the despair that clung to me like a fog. As I approached, the whispers intensified, almost frantic, urging me to listen, to understand their plight. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, torn between the urge to flee and an inexplicable desire to know what lay beneath the surface of their sorrow. "Please," I whispered, desperation seeping into my voice. "I need to find my friends." The energy radiating from the grave pulsed in response, a low thrum that echoed in my bones. It was as if the ground itself was alive, reacting to my presence and my fear. Suddenly, the world around me darkened, the shadows thickening, coalescing into a dark mist that snaked through the cemetery. I felt the pull of the nameless grave, a magnetic force that sought to ensnare me. I could almost hear my friend's laughter in the distance, mingling with the whispers, but it was distant, fading. I turned to escape, racing down the path that led toward the gate, my heart racing with each step. But as I reached the exit, it felt as if the gate was moving farther away, the cemetery stretching before me like a living labyrinth. Panic clawed at my throat as I pressed forward, desperate to break free. "Jake! Mia! Sam!" I screamed, my voice raw and strained, each shout a plea for help. But the cemetery swallowed my cries, amplifying the silence that surrounded me. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on my back, watching, waiting. Just when I thought I could reach the gate, I stumbled over a root, falling hard against the ground. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my body, but I pushed myself up, scrambling to my feet. I turned to look back, my breath hitching as I noticed something in the shadows, a flicker of movement, the outline of a figure appearing just beyond the trees. Who's there? I called, my voice shaking with fear. The figure didn't answer, it simply stood there, observing me. A flash of recognition hit me. It looked like one of my friends, but something about it felt wrong. The figure was too still, too unnatural. I took a cautious step closer, squinting to see better in the dim light. "Jake?" I ventured, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure shifted slightly, but still remained silent. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that it wasn't just a shadow, it was a form, a shape that loomed larger than life, emanating an aura of despair. My heart raced, and I took another step back, the ground shifting beneath my feet again. "Please, just show yourself," I cried, my voice breaking as the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. The shadows around me deepened, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the cemetery closing in, tightening its grip around me. In that moment, I felt a surge of courage, fueled by the need to confront whatever haunted this place. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, my voice echoing against the tombstones. But deep down, I felt the fear creeping in, a gnawing doubt that threatened to engulf me. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Jake, at least, it looked like him. His face was pale, eyes wide and filled with a strange mixture of terror and something else I couldn't quite place. "Why did you leave us?" he whispered, his voice echoing with an eerie resonance. "What do you mean?" "I was looking for you," I replied, confusion clouding my mind. "Where are Mia and Sam?" His expression shifted, a haunting sadness replacing the terror. "They're here, with us. You shouldn't have come." The words sent a chill through my body, and I felt the cemetery shift again, the air thickening around me. "No. I need to find them," I cried, my voice tinged with desperation. I took a step forward, reaching out for him, but as I did, he faded back into the shadows, leaving me alone once more. Suddenly, the whispers turned into a cacophony of screams, rising and falling like a violent tide. The sound enveloped me, drowning me in fear. I turned to run again, but the shadows closed in, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I stumbled through the cemetery, disoriented and terrified, the shadows whispering my name as I raced toward the gate. The path twisted before me, and every direction seemed to lead me deeper into the heart of darkness. As I ran, I could feel the energy from the nameless grave pulsing behind me, growing stronger, more insistent. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it, dozens of pale figures rising from the graves, their faces twisted in anguish, their mouths moving in a silent plea. I felt bile rise in my throat. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, fear overtaking me. The figures reached out, their hands clawing at the air, and I realized they were all the lost souls, trapped within the confines of this cursed cemetery. In that moment of clarity, I understood. I was not merely a visitor, I was being drawn into their world, their pain. The thought consumed me, and I felt tears streaming down my face as I pushed myself forward, desperate to escape the horror closing in around me. Just as I thought I would collapse, I saw the gate, a sliver of light shining through the darkness. I sprinted toward it, my heart racing with a renewed sense of hope. The whispers reached a fever pitch, but I couldn't listen to them anymore. I had to break free. I threw myself against the gate, feeling the cold metal press against my body. I pushed with every ounce of strength, praying it would give way. The shadows clawed at me, but I refused to give in. With one final push, the gate creaked open, and I stumbled through, collapsing onto the gravel outside. Gasping for breath, I rolled over and looked back at the cemetery. The figures stood at the edge, their forms blurred and indistinct, watching me with hollow eyes. The whispers faded, becoming mere echoes of the horrors I had escaped. But as I lay there, the weight of the nameless grave still heavy on my mind, I realized this wasn't over. I had escaped, but something was still lingering, something that would not let me go. I could feel its presence creeping back, a dark shadow that whispered of unfinished business, of a debt yet to be paid. I pushed myself up, shaking with fear and adrenaline. I have to find my friends, I murmured, the urgency burning within me. But even as I spoke, I felt the cold tendrils of dread wrapping around my heart. What if they were still inside? What if they were lost like the others? The thought propelled me back to my feet, my resolve hardening. I couldn't leave them behind. I turned back toward the cemetery, the looming shadows beckoning me to return. And though I was terrified, I knew I had to go back to face the nameless grave and the darkness that lay within. The cemetery loomed before me like a dark maw, its entrance shrouded in shadows. I hesitated, fear clawing at my throat, but the thought of Jake, Mia, and Sam anchored me. They needed me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the creeping dread that threatened to swallow me whole. As I stepped back through the gate, a chill wind swept past, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. Each step felt heavier than the last, the ground shifting beneath my feet as I made my way back into the heart of the graveyard. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the weathered tombstones that seemed to lean closer, as if eager to hear the unfolding story of the living intruder. Jake. I called again, my voice trembling but resolute. Mia. Sam. The echoes of my cries faded into the night, swallowed by the oppressive silence. A shiver raced down my spine as I realized I was utterly alone, but I pressed on, driven by a fierce determination. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of forgotten memories. I could hear the whispers again, a disjointed symphony that grew louder as I ventured deeper. They tugged at my consciousness, pulling me toward the nameless grave, urging me to uncover its secrets. My heart raced as I approached the clearing, the pulse of the grave thrumming in my veins. I had to resist the urge to turn back, to flee from the horrors that lay ahead. This is just a cemetery, I reminded myself, but my mind struggled to rationalize the strange events of the night. As I neared the nameless grave, the shadows seemed to coalesce around me, the figures lurking just out of sight. I felt their despair wash over me like a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. I steeled myself against their haunting presence, forcing my gaze to the grave itself, a stark reminder of the stories buried beneath. Please, I whispered, desperation creeping into my voice. I just want to find my friends. I knelt beside the grave, the energy pulsating around me, and I pressed my palm against the cool stone. In that moment, a wave of visions washed over me, images of sorrow, loss, and despair. I could see flickering lights, shadows dancing on the edges of my vision. Faces emerged, their expressions a mixture of longing and anguish. They seemed to be trapped in an endless loop, their stories playing out like a film reel. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the surge of emotions, and I understood that these souls were reaching out, trying to make contact. Who are you? I gasped, my heart racing. What do you want? The energy from the grave surged, and I felt a strange connection, as if the spirits were trying to communicate. Suddenly, I heard a voice, soft yet insistent, cutting through the whispers. Help us. The plea sent a chill through my body, and I opened my eyes wide, scanning the darkness for the source. Help you? I echoed, confusion clouding my thoughts. How can I help you? You must remember, the voice urged, a thread of urgency woven into the words. You must remember what happened here. The shadows around me began to twist, shifting and morphing into shapes that formed images of the past, a family, a mother weeping by a grave, children laughing, and then, a sudden silence, a dark figure looming. The visions consumed me, and I was transported to a time long gone. I saw the cemetery in its prime, a place filled with laughter and joy, a sanctuary for families. But then the dark figure appeared, a man, his eyes hollow and filled with rage, standing over a grave, a storm of despair brewing around him. I felt the chill of his anger, the weight of his sorrow, and I knew this was the catalyst for the tragedy that had befallen this place. No! I gasped, the connection severing as I pulled away. The visions faded, but the echoes of their pain remained, resonating deep within me. I could feel the weight of their stories pressing down on me, begging to be heard, but I didn't know how to help them. I staggered back, trying to catch my breath, but the shadows began to close in around me, whispering their tales of woe, each one a fragment of the larger tragedy that had unfolded in this cemetery. The air felt electric with tension, the ground trembling beneath me as if the very earth was alive, yearning for release. Jake! I cried out again, fear twisting in my gut. I had to find my friends. I couldn't let them be lost to this darkness. I turned away from the nameless grave, scanning the graveyard for any sign of life. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting into shadows and uncertainty. Then, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shape darting between the tombstones. Mia? I called, my voice trembling with hope. I raced toward the movement, heart pounding in my chest. As I drew closer, the figure became clearer. It was her. Mia! I shouted, relief flooding through me. She turned, her face pale and haunted, eyes wide with terror. But before I could reach her, she stumbled back, shaking her head in fear. Don't come any closer, she yelled, her voice laced with panic. You don't understand. Mia, it's me. We have to get out of here. I pleaded, desperate to bridge the gap between us. But the shadows shifted again, and I could see the darkness swirling around her, grasping at her like hungry hands. No! You have to leave, she cried, backing away further. It's not safe. The shadows, they're alive. They won't let us go. I felt a cold dread creep back into my heart. But where are Jake and Sam? We have to find them. They're lost, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. I tried to find them, but they disappeared. It's like the cemetery swallowed them whole. No! I shouted, anger flaring within me. We can't give up. We have to keep looking. The shadows around us thickened, pressing closer, their whispers growing more frantic, more desperate. As I reached for Mia, I felt the energy from the nameless grave surge once more, and a pulse of clarity washed over me. We can't stay here. We have to confront whatever is keeping them trapped. Mia's eyes widened, and for a moment, I could see a flicker of hope. You really think we can? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. We have to try. I replied, my heart racing with determination. Together, we can face this darkness. With renewed resolve, we turned back toward the center of the graveyard, determined to face whatever lay in wait. The shadows shifted around us, whispering warnings and threats, but we pressed on, united by our fear and our hope. As we approached the nameless grave again, I felt the ground tremble beneath our feet, the energy coiling like a serpent, ready to strike. The air was thick with tension, a sense of impending doom hanging over us like a dark cloud. Jake! I shouted one last time, desperation spilling into my voice. We're here. We're coming to find you. The cemetery fell silent, the whispers dying down, and for a brief moment, I felt an otherworldly stillness envelop us. Then, out of the shadows, a familiar figure emerged. It was Jake, looking disheveled and lost, but alive. Guys, he shouted, relief washing over his face. But as he stepped forward, the shadows surged, dragging him back into the darkness. No! I screamed, lunging forward, but the shadows closed around him, thick and inescapable. The ground beneath us rumbled, and I felt a surge of energy pulling me back. Mia, we have to do something. I yelled, panic rising in my chest. I don't know what to do, she cried, tears streaming down her face. It's too powerful. I glanced at the nameless grave, the pulse of energy strong and overwhelming. Maybe it's connected to him. We need to confront it. I took a step toward the grave, the energy surging around me, beckoning me closer. As I reached out to touch the stone, a wave of visions washed over me once again. The history of the cemetery unfolded before me, tragedy, betrayal, and darkness woven into the very fabric of the ground. I felt the weight of countless souls, their stories demanding to be heard, begging for release. Help us, the voice echoed in my mind, stronger than before. Set us free. With a surge of determination, I focused on the energy, channeling it into a plea for release. We're here. We can help you. I shouted, my voice piercing through the darkness. Let Jake go. We won't leave you. The shadows flickered, momentarily retreating as if they were caught off guard. I could feel the pulse of the nameless grave intensifying, the energy swirling around us like a storm. Please, I cried, desperation spilling into my voice. Let him go. We'll remember you. We won't forget. Suddenly, a brilliant light erupted from the grave, illuminating the cemetery in a blinding flash. The shadows recoiled, shrieking in anguish as they began to dissipate, swirling away into the night. Keep going, Mia shouted, her voice ringing with urgency. You can do it. With every ounce of strength, I pushed against the shadows, channeling my energy into the light that erupted from the grave. We're here. We remember you. I shouted, feeling the warmth of the light enveloping us, pushing back the darkness. As the shadows thinned, I saw Jake being released, the grip of the darkness loosening around him. He staggered forward, confusion etched on his face, but the light surrounded him, guiding him back to us. Mia. Emily, he gasped, relief flooding his voice. You found me. Quick. We need to leave. I yelled, pulling him toward us as the shadows continued to recede. But just as we turned to escape, a figure emerged from the depths of darkness, a man, his face twisted in rage, eyes glowing with malice. You think you can escape me? He roared, the shadows coiling around him like a living cloak. Panic surged through me as I realized he was the source of the darkness, the catalyst for the tragedy that had unfolded in the cemetery. We won't let you keep them. I shouted defiantly, standing my ground. The light flickered but remained steady, a barrier against his wrath. You have no power here. I yelled, channeling every ounce of my strength into the light. The man's expression twisted into a snarl, and he lunged toward us, but the light surged forward, pushing him back. You are nothing, he screamed, his voice echoing through the cemetery. Let us go, I demanded, heart pounding in my chest. The energy surged around us, and I felt the whispers of the lost souls rising in strength, urging us on. "Remember us," they cried in unison, their voices a chorus of pain and longing. The light pulsed in response, illuminating the darkness as the shadows receded further. With one final push, I shouted, "We will remember. We won't forget your pain." As the words left my lips, the light exploded, enveloping us in a radiant glow. The shadows screamed in fury, dissipating into the night as the figure of the man twisted and vanished, leaving only silence behind. The energy settled, and as the light dimmed, I found myself standing in the cemetery, breathless and trembling. The nameless grave pulsed softly, its energy now warm and inviting. "We did it!" Jake gasped, his voice filled with awe. But even as I felt the relief wash over me, a weight settled in my chest. "What about the others?" I asked, scanning the cemetery for any sign of Sam. "I don't know," Mia whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to find him." Together, we turned back into the depths of the cemetery, united by our determination to rescue our friend from the clutches of the darkness. With adrenaline coursing through our veins, we moved deeper into the cemetery, the air still thick with an electric tension. The moon cast long shadows over the uneven ground, making every tombstone seem like a sentinel watching our every move. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed the urgency of our mission. "Sam!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the stillness. "Where are you?" Each call seemed to absorb the darkness, but there was no reply, just the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl, as if nature itself was holding its breath. "Mia, do you remember which way he went?" Jake asked, his brow furrowed with worry. Mia shook her head, her eyes darting nervously between the graves. "He said he saw something over there," she replied, pointing toward a cluster of aged tombstones. "But that was a while ago." We exchanged anxious glances, the gravity of our situation sinking in. It felt as though the cemetery was shifting around us, the shadows growing bolder, almost as if they were alive and aware of our presence. "We have to keep moving," I urged, pushing aside my growing fear. "We can't leave him behind." As we trudged forward, the atmosphere grew heavier, thick with the weight of the souls that lingered in this forgotten place. I could feel their sorrow pressing against me, urging us to remember, to acknowledge their stories, their pain. The path weaved between graves, and every step I took felt like an intrusion. Each tombstone told a tale of loss, etched in stone, yet they were all forgotten, much like the souls that lingered here. I could feel the ground beneath us pulse softly, a reminder of the energy that had been unleashed from the nameless grave. "Do you think it's safe to keep going?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It has to be," I replied, my mind racing. "We have to find Sam. If we don't, we might not make it out of here ourselves." The graveyard felt alive, and as we drew closer to the cluster of tombstones Mia had pointed out, I noticed the air growing colder, each breath leaving a trail of mist. The shadows deepened around us, coiling like smoke, and I could sense the fear creeping back in, wrapping around my heart like a vice. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I spotted a flicker of movement, just a shadow darting between the graves. My heart raced. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling with urgency. "What?" Jake replied, looking in the direction I was pointing. "Over there," I insisted, pointing toward the shadow. "I think it was Sam." Without waiting for an answer, I took off toward the direction I'd seen the movement, my feet pounding against the ground. "Sam." "It's me, Emily," I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. As I reached the cluster of tombstones, I skidded to a halt, heart racing. The area was dimly lit, the moonlight filtering through the branches above, casting eerie shadows on the ground. "Sam!" I shouted again, desperation lacing my voice. But there was only silence, heavy and oppressive. I turned back to Jake and Mia, panic rising in my chest. "Where is he?" "I don't know," Mia said, her voice shaking. "Maybe we should check the other side of the graveyard?" "No," I replied firmly. "We need to stay together. We can't let the shadows divide us." As we stood there, the silence seemed to stretch on endlessly, thick with anticipation. Suddenly, I felt a chill sweep through the air, and the shadows around us shifted again, swirling like a dark vortex. "It's coming," I whispered, my heart racing. "What's coming?" Jake asked, glancing around nervously. "I don't know," I admitted, fear pooling in my stomach. "But we need to find Sam before it gets here." Just then, we heard a faint rustling sound, a whisper carried by the wind. I strained to listen, the air crackling with tension. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my breath hitching in my throat. "It sounded like someone calling for help," Mia said, her eyes widening. "Sam!" I shouted, my heart pounding. "We're coming!" Following the sound, we pushed through the dense underbrush, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. The trees seemed to close in around us, the shadows stretching and reaching like grasping hands. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me, but I couldn't back down now, not when Sam might be in danger. As we moved deeper into the cemetery, the whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind like a haunting melody. They spoke of despair, loss, and longing, a chorus of souls trapped in an eternal night. Then, we stumbled upon a small clearing, the moonlight illuminating a single, unmarked grave at its center. My heart sank as I took in this scene. The air around it felt charged with energy, a palpable sense of foreboding hanging in the air. "Sam!" I called again, my voice trembling. "Where are you?" The shadows coiled around the grave, writhing and pulsating as if alive. "He's here," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it." "What do we do?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to confront whatever is in there," I said, taking a step closer. "It's the only way to find him." As I knelt beside the grave, the energy surged, and I could hear the whispers more clearly now, urgent, pleading, demanding to be heard. "Help us," they cried, their voices a haunting echo in the night. "We're not afraid of you." I shouted into the darkness, channeling my fear into defiance. "We're here to help." The shadows twisted violently, and I felt a rush of cold air, a tangible force pushing against me. But I held my ground, focusing on the light that still flickered within me. "Sam!" I called again, my voice stronger now. "Can you hear me?" Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, tattered and ghostly, a mere outline of a person. It was Sam, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. "Emily," he gasped, his voice strained. "Is that you?" "Yes. It's me," I cried, relief flooding through me. "We're here to get you out." But just as I reached for him, the shadows surged forward, wrapping around Sam like a constricting serpent. "No!" I shouted, panic surging through me. "Let him go!" The whispers intensified, rising to a crescendo of desperation. "You must remember," they chanted, their voices a haunting echo that filled the air. "You must remember what happened." In that moment, clarity washed over me, a vision of the cemetery's past, of betrayal and loss, flooded my mind. I saw the figure of a man, his rage consuming him, the cemetery bearing witness to his dark deeds. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the clearing. "We won't forget. We will remember your pain." The shadows recoiled, the grip on Sam loosening just enough for him to take a step forward. "Emily," he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "Help me." With renewed determination, I reached for him, my fingers brushing against his arm. "Hold on, Sam. We're going to get you out of here." Jake and Mia rushed to my side, their faces set with determination. Together, we formed a circle around Sam, our combined strength pushing back against the shadows. "We won't let you take him," Jake shouted, his voice strong and defiant. The shadows twisted and writhed, a cacophony of rage echoing in the air. "You cannot escape," they screeched, their voices a haunting melody of despair. "We will escape," I shouted back, channeling every ounce of courage I had. "We will remember you." As the energy surged around us, the whispers began to fade, their desperate cries growing weaker. The shadows retreated, and I felt the grip on Sam loosen further. "You have to believe," Mia urged, her voice ringing with determination. "I do," Sam gasped, his face filled with fear but also a flicker of hope. "I won't let them take me." With one final push, I reached out and grasped Sam's arm, pulling him closer. "Together," I cried. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. In that moment, we pulled him free, the shadows screaming in fury as we yanked him away from their grasp. The energy exploded around us, the light engulfing the clearing and pushing back the darkness. As the shadows dissipated, we staggered back, breathless but alive. "We did it," I gasped, my heart racing. "Sam, are you okay?" Jake asked, concern etched on his face. "I think so," Sam replied, looking dazed but unharmed. "But we have to get out of here. Now." The cemetery felt different now, the air lighter, the oppressive weight of despair lifted. But I knew the darkness wasn't truly gone. It lingered at the edges, waiting for another chance to reclaim its victims. "Let's go," I urged, leading the way back toward the exit, the path illuminated by the fading moonlight. We could still hear the echoes of the souls, their stories woven into the very fabric of the cemetery. But for now, we had escaped, united by the bonds of friendship and resilience. I glanced back at the nameless grave, a silent promise lingering in the air. "We will remember," I whispered, knowing that the stories of the lost would not fade into oblivion. And as we stepped out of the shadows and into the safety of the night, I felt a sense of peace settle in my heart, even as the memory of the darkness clung to the edges of my mind. As we left the graveyard, the world outside felt foreign and surreal, the shadows from the cemetery still clinging to us like a second skin. The cool night air wrapped around us, contrasting sharply with the suffocating heaviness we had just escaped. My heart still raced, the adrenaline making my limbs feel heavy and disconnected. I kept glancing back at the cemetery, the ancient stones standing solemnly against the night sky, but their menacing presence had faded, leaving only an eerie stillness in their wake. Did that really just happen? Sam's voice broke through the silence, shaky yet filled with wonder. "Yeah, it did," I replied, still trying to catch my breath. "But we made it. We're safe now." Mia shook her head in disbelief, her eyes wide. "But what did we unleash?" There was something dark in there, something that wanted to keep us. "We're alive," Jake said firmly, determination flickering in his eyes. We faced it and came out stronger. But deep down, I felt the unsettling truth of his words. Just because we had escaped didn't mean we were free from the past that haunted us. The cemetery wasn't just a collection of graves, it was a testament to the souls who had once walked this earth, each with a story woven into the fabric of time. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of something far more profound and troubling. As we reached the edge of the cemetery, a chilling wind swept through the trees, sending shivers down my spine. I paused for a moment, scanning the area, half expecting the shadows to re-emerge. "Let's keep moving," I urged, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. We walked in silence, the glow of the streetlights ahead promising safety. But the tranquility of the night felt fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. "Do you think we should tell someone?" Sam asked, breaking the heavy silence. "Like who?" I replied. "What would we even say? Hey, we just faced a malevolent spirit in a cemetery?" "But we can't just pretend it didn't happen," Mia insisted, glancing back at the graveyard. "What if it comes back? What if it wants us again?" Jake frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "We need to process this, but I don't know how." It felt so real. As we neared the entrance to the cemetery, I hesitated. What if we went back? Maybe there's something we missed, something that could help us understand what happened. The three of them turned to me, their expressions a mix of fear and curiosity. "Are you serious?" Sam asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "We barely escaped with our lives," Mia added, her voice trembling. "What if we can't do it again?" "I get it," I replied, meeting their gazes. "But what if understanding what happened is the only way to truly be free? We can't live in fear. Or we could walk away and leave it behind," Jake suggested, his brow furrowed with concern. "Maybe we can't," I countered, the weight of my conviction growing stronger. "Maybe it's already a part of us. What if the cemetery is tied to us somehow?" The tension in the air thickened as we stood at the edge of the light. The shadows behind us seemed to stretch and contract, waiting for our decision. "I'll go back," I declared, surprising even myself with the strength of my resolve. "But I won't go alone." Mia sighed, her shoulders drooping. "Okay, but if we do this, we need a plan. We need to know what we're looking for." We exchanged glances, a silent agreement forming between us. "Let's meet back here in 15 minutes, I suggested. "We can gather our thoughts and stick together." As they nodded in agreement, I felt a surge of determination. We were facing the unknown together, and together, we would uncover the truth. With a deep breath, I turned back toward the cemetery, the moonlight guiding my way. The familiar path felt different now, an echo of the terror we had faced, yet also a challenge, a call to confront the darkness that lingered. Entering the cemetery again was like stepping into another realm, the atmosphere thick with an unsettling energy. The shadows stretched, undulating like waves, as if testing my resolve. "I'm not afraid of you," I whispered, forcing myself to move forward. The nameless grave stood before me, its energy pulsing softly, almost inviting. I knelt before it, placing my hand on the cool surface, feeling the vibrations beneath my fingers. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady. "Why did you trap us?" As if in response, the air grew colder, and I could hear the whispers again, swirling around me like a tempest. "Remember us," they pleaded, the voices rising and falling in a haunting rhythm. "What do you want me to remember?" I shouted into the darkness, frustration boiling within me. Suddenly, a vision flashed before my eyes, a series of images cascading like a film reel. I saw the man, his face twisted in anguish, standing in the very spot where I knelt. I could feel his pain, his longing for acknowledgement. He had been wronged, forgotten by time, and now sought to reclaim his story through any means necessary. I understand, I murmured, the weight of his sorrow pressing against me. You was to remember, to acknowledge your pain. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices crying out for recognition. Help us. Remember us. Tears streamed down my cheeks as the realization settled within me. The darkness wasn't simply evil, it was a manifestation of grief and despair, a desperate plea for acknowledgement. As the vision faded, I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. I will remember, I vowed, the words resonating deep within me. We will remember you. Just then, I felt a presence behind me, and I turned to see Jake, Mia, and Sam approaching cautiously. Emily! Sam called, his voice laced with concern. What's happening? I wiped my tears away, feeling a mix of fear and hope. I think I understand now, I said, my voice trembling. It's not just about us escaping, it's about acknowledging the stories of those who came before us. What do we do? Mia asked, her eyes wide with apprehension. We need to honor them, I replied, my heart racing with newfound purpose. We have to remember and tell their stories. Only then can they find peace. The shadows flickered as if responding to my words, the energy around us shifting. You think that will work? Jake asked, skepticism lining his features. It has to, I insisted. We owe it to them. We can't let their pain be forgotten. The shadows pulsed around us, a rhythmic echo of despair mingling with hope. Let's do this together, I said, determination igniting within me. We can share their stories, their pain, and help them find peace. As we stood together at the nameless grave, the air felt charged with energy, and the whispers of the lost souls surrounded us, urging us forward. Help us remember, they cried, their voices a haunting melody. Together, we reached out, our hands brushing against the cool earth, feeling the weight of the souls buried beneath. We will remember you, we chanted, our voices rising in unison, echoing through the cemetery. The shadows shifted and swirled, the energy around us pulsing like a heartbeat. Thank you, the whispers sang, a chorus of gratitude resonating in the night. And in that moment, I felt a profound connection, a bridge between the past and the present, as if the souls of the cemetery were embracing us, allowing us to share their burden. The darkness around us began to recede, its grip loosening as we honored their stories, acknowledging their pain. We stood united, the weight of the past shifting, and for the first time, I felt the warmth of light pushing back against the shadows, reclaiming the space that had once been consumed by despair. We will remember, I vow again, the words sealing our promise to those who had been lost. And as the cemetery slowly transformed, the weight of grief lifting, I knew we had begun to heal not just for ourselves, but for those who had once wandered these grounds, forgotten and alone. The atmosphere within the cemetery shifted dramatically as we stood together, our hands resting on the nameless grave. A sense of warmth spread through me, as if the energy of the lost souls enveloped us, grateful for our acknowledgement. But beneath that warmth, a lingering darkness still loomed, reminding me that our battle wasn't over. As we chanted, "We will remember you," the whispers intensified, swirling around us like a storm, their echoes ricocheting off the ancient stones. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, the merging of past and present igniting a spark within me. But as the energy shifted, I sensed something else, a shadow creeping back into the corners of our resolve. Emily, do you feel that? Jake whispered, his face paling. I nodded, feeling a chill creeping up my spine. The warmth we had felt moments before was fading, replaced by a bone-deep cold that seeped into our bones. Something isn't right, I murmured, glancing around as the shadows began to gather again, coalescing into a more defined form. Get back! Mia shouted, pulling us away from the grave as a figure began to materialize from the darkness. It was tall and shrouded in a cloak of shadow, its features indistinct yet overwhelmingly ominous. The air thickened with an oppressive energy, the whispers transforming into anguished wails that echoed in the stillness of the night. Fools, the figure hissed, its voice a chilling growl that resonated deep within my core. You dare to disturb the peace I have claimed? What do you want? I shouted, trying to muster courage in the face of its dark presence. I am the keeper of these souls, and you have disrupted the balance, it replied, advancing toward us. They are mine to hold, and you will pay for your insolence. The energy around us crackled, and I felt the shadows pressing in closer, suffocating the light we had briefly summoned. Panic surged through me, and I exchanged frantic glances with my friends. We can't let it take them, Jake yelled, stepping protectively in front of us. Wait! I shouted, realization striking me like a lightning bolt. We need to show it that we remember, that we honor the lost. The dark figure paused, its shadowy form wavering as if caught off guard. You think mere words can save you? Words can carry power, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. They can bind us together, reminding us of the stories that were once lost. The souls deserve to be remembered, not trapped. The whispers of the souls rose again, a chorus of sorrow intermingling with hope. Remember us. Help us find peace. In that moment, I felt a surge of energy rising within me, a connection to the spirits around us. You are not just shadows, I called out, addressing both the figure and the souls. You are stories that deserve to be told, memories that should not fade. As I spoke, the shadows around us flickered, the dark figure hesitating, the tension palpable in the air. Your words mean nothing, it snarled, though its voice was less certain now. Then listen, I shouted, feeling the strength of my conviction swell. You may think you have power over them, but you cannot silence their stories. They live on through us. With that, we all join in, our voices rising in unison, echoing through the cemetery. We will remember. We honor you. Your stories will be told. The air grew electric, and I could feel the energy shifting as the shadows recoiled from our collective resolve. The dark figure shrieked in anger, its form starting to unravel. No! You will not take them from me. But we stood firm, our voices the united front against the darkness. We will remember, we cried, the words intertwining with the whispers of the souls, creating a powerful symphony that reverberated through the night. The dark figure thrashed in fury, its shadows lashing out at us, but they dissolved in the light of our shared commitment. Stop, it screamed, desperation creeping into its tone. You cannot win. I already have, I replied, feeling the weight of the darkness lift as the spirits surged around us, a collective force of light breaking through the veil of shadow. The energy became a swirling vortex, pulling the figure apart, unraveling the threads of its power. In a final, deafening wail, the figure disintegrated into nothingness, its shadows dissipating into the night. The cemetery fell silent, the air clearing, leaving only the gentle whispers of gratitude lingering like a sweet memory. As we stood together, the warmth returned, wrapping around us like a comforting embrace. The nameless grave glowed softly, the energy of the souls infused with our promise. "Thank you," I whispered, knowing that the battle was over, but the journey of remembrance had just begun. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, the fear that had consumed me now replaced by a profound connection to the stories of the past. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, not just for ourselves, but for those who had been lost in the shadows. "We did it," Mia breathed, her eyes shining with tears of relief and triumph. "Together," I replied, reaching for her hand, pulling Jake and Sam into the circle. "We honored them, and they will never be forgotten." As we turned to leave the cemetery, I looked back one last time at the nameless grave, a silent promise to carry their stories with us, to ensure that their voices would echo through time. The night was still, the moon casting a soft glow over the cemetery, illuminating the stones that now felt less like tombs and more like guardians of the stories we had reclaimed. The weight of our experience hung heavily in the air, but it was no longer a burden, it was a gift, a responsibility to remember, to share, and to honor. And as we stepped away from the shadows, I felt a lightness in my heart, knowing that we had not only faced the darkness, but had also emerged stronger, bound together by the stories of the lost. Forgotten fears. Have you ever returned to a place that felt like a forgotten corner of your memory, only to feel something lingering, just on the edge of your vision? When I stepped off the bus and onto the cracked pavement of my old hometown, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was waiting for me here, like the place itself was holding its breath. It was a quaint town with just a few hundred people, nestled between forests and fields, so quiet that most would call it peaceful. But to me, it had always been a place of secrets, of fears I had pushed deep down and away. I hadn't been back in over 20 years, not since my mother took me and fled in the middle of the night, with only a suitcase and a whispered promise that we would never return. And yet, here I was, facing the streets and shadows that still felt untouched by time. The place had changed, of course, buildings were more worn, shops I remembered were now abandoned, and the playground by the river where I spent so many afternoons stood rusted and forgotten. As I walked through town, people barely glanced at me. It was like they could sense I didn't belong, that I was a ghost from another time. By the time I reached my old house, my chest felt heavy. The structure was smaller than I remembered, its paint peeling, shutters hanging loose. I could almost hear the distant creak of its wooden floors, and something deep inside me clenched as I imagined what lay beyond its doors. Memories began surfacing, fleeting visions of dark corridors, of faint whispers and shadows that darted just out of sight. The worst, though, were the faces of people I didn't know, people who never quite seemed alive. The locals had told me to avoid this part of town, and looking at the house, I could see why. But something stronger than fear was pulling me forward, guiding me to confront whatever waited for me here. I hesitated at the doorstep, taking in every small detail, the chipped paint on the door, the faint scuff marks near the handle. Each was a reminder that this place had a life of its own, a history that had continued in my absence. My hand hovered, trembling slightly as I reached for the tarnished brass doorknob. I could feel a chill emanating from within, even though it was a mild day. Finally, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. A rush of stale air hit me, thick with dust and something else, something bitter and metallic that instantly made my stomach churn. The interior was dark, as though the house had swallowed up every last trace of sunlight. But I could still make out the shapes of familiar furniture cloaked in sheets, standing silently as if frozen in time. The wooden floorboards creaked under my weight as I took a step inside, their echoes stretching into the silence. I remembered that sound from childhood, the creak that seemed to follow me wherever I went, as if the house itself was alive, always aware of my movements. Back then, each creak had felt like a warning, a reminder to stay away from certain rooms, especially from the basement. I scanned the room, feeling an odd, uncomfortable mixture of familiarity and unease. To my left, the staircase led to the bedrooms, and to the right was the dimly lit hallway that stretched towards the back of the house, leading to the kitchen and, eventually, the basement door. My eyes lingered on that hallway, memories slowly surfacing, fragments of forgotten whispers and footsteps that didn't belong to anyone I knew. I could almost see the younger version of myself, running down that hall, glancing over his shoulder, too afraid to look back. As I moved forward, the dust swirled in the narrow shafts of light breaking through the boarded windows, like tiny phantoms hovering in the air. I stopped in the center of the living room, my eyes falling upon the old mirror hanging above the fireplace. It had a cracked frame, its glass dulled from years of neglect. I remembered hating that mirror as a child, convinced that I'd seen shadows moving within it, flickering shapes that appeared only when I looked away. Even now, the sight of it made my skin crawl. I avoided its reflection, as if expecting to see something there that I couldn't bear to confront. It was strange to feel so unnerved by a simple mirror, but here, in this house, it felt like anything could be possible, like anything could be waiting, just out of sight. Then, from somewhere in the house, a noise broke the silence, a soft, almost imperceptible tapping sound. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable in the stillness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It sounded like it was coming from upstairs, but I couldn't be sure. The tapping continued, irregular yet persistent, like fingers drumming on wood. A shiver ran down my spine, and I felt a surge of irrational fear, the kind that makes you want to turn and run without looking back. But I forced myself to stand still, to remind myself that it was just an old house, nothing more. Maybe a draft or some loose beam, I thought, though even I didn't quite believe it. I swallowed hard and took another step, moving towards the staircase. The tapping had stopped, but I could still feel it, lingering in the air, a phantom rhythm that echoed in my mind. I gripped the wooden banister, feeling its rough, splintered texture beneath my fingers as I began to ascend. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house was pressing down on me, slowing me, trying to make me turn back. Halfway up, I paused, feeling an intense urge to look behind me. The silence was thick, oppressive, and I felt as if something was watching, just out of sight. Slowly, I turned my head, looking back down the stairs. But there was nothing there, just the empty, darkened hallway, stretching out like a tunnel. I took a deep breath and continued up, finally reaching the landing. The upstairs corridor was narrow, with doors on either side, each leading to rooms that had once been filled with life, but were now abandoned to shadows. I walked past them slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the floor. At the end of the hallway was the room that had once been mine. I hesitated before opening the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit space. The bed was still there, as was the small wooden desk in the corner, both draped in heavy layers of dust. But it was the closet door, slightly ajar, that caught my attention. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I stood frozen, staring at that narrow gap in the closet door. A strange sense of recognition filled me, like I had seen this exact scene in a dream or perhaps a nightmare. Shadows pulled around the small, dark opening, and I felt the urge to turn away, to leave the room and never look back. Yet, something stronger kept me rooted there, some morbid curiosity or half-buried memory that I couldn't quite access. Taking a cautious step forward, I tried to reassure myself. There was nothing there, I thought, just the hollow darkness that cloaked the forgotten corners of this house. Yet every instinct I had was screaming that I shouldn't get closer, that some part of my childhood fears was still alive in that tiny space, waiting for me. My fingers reached out, hovering just above the edge of the closet door. My pulse raced, and I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I swallowed, feeling my mouth go dry, then gave the door a gentle push. It swung open with a low, eerie creak, revealing the black void inside. Dust filled the air, swirling like spectral forms caught in the slant of light spilling through the window. The closet was empty, of course, just a small, cramped space filled with stale air. But even as I stared into it, an unsettling feeling crept over me, as though it weren't entirely empty after all. I could feel something there, something I couldn't see, lying just beyond the reach of the dim light. It was as if the closet itself was holding onto memories, echoes of something I'd forgotten long ago. Steeling myself, I reached into the darkness, running my fingers along the back wall. The wood was cold and rough beneath my touch, and I felt an odd indentation, a tiny notch that I didn't remember being there. As I traced it, a sudden flood of images overwhelmed me, memories of hiding in this very closet, clutching at the wall, holding my breath to avoid whatever might have been lurking outside. I remembered feeling a presence, something just beyond the door, waiting, listening. Even now, as an adult, the thought made my skin prickle. Shaking off the eerie sensation, I took a step back and closed the closet door, almost too quickly, as though I needed to trap whatever memories were stirring within. I turned away, forcing myself to look at the rest of the room instead. It was strange being here again, seeing the remnants of my childhood life left untouched. My eyes fell on the small dresser against the wall, its top covered in dust. A few small trinkets were still scattered across it, an old toy car, a chipped model airplane, and a tiny wooden figure my father had carved for me before he left. As I reached for the figurine, memories of him came flooding back, faint images of his face, his hands as he worked on it, smoothing each edge with careful strokes. Holding it in my hand now, I could almost feel his presence, as if he were standing right behind me, watching. But the moment shattered as another sound echoed through the house. This time it was a creak, slow and drawn out, coming from somewhere below. It sounded like the front door, and the very thought sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I had closed it when I came in. Setting the wooden figure back down, I moved towards the hallway, listening intently. Silence filled the air, thick and stifling, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone here. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe a stray animal had found its way in, or perhaps the wind had somehow pushed the door open. But deep down, I knew it was something more, something I didn't want to admit. As I made my way back downstairs, every creak of the floorboards seemed louder, more ominous. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. But each time I looked, there was only empty space, the hollow quiet of an abandoned home. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I could see the front door standing slightly ajar. I approached cautiously, peering outside to see if anyone was there. The street was empty, silent. Even the usual sounds of the town, birds, distant cars, seemed to have faded, as though the house were cut off from the world outside. I pushed the door shut, securing it with a twist of the lock, then stood there, my hand lingering on the doorknob, my mind racing. Turning back towards the living room, I felt a sudden chill, a prickling sensation at the nape of my neck. I wasn't alone, the realization hit me like a jolt. Something was here with me, something I couldn't see but could feel, lurking just out of sight. I scanned the room, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but there was nothing there. Only the same worn furniture and the ghostly veil of dust that clung to every surface. But then, I noticed it, a faint outline in the dust on the floor, just a few feet away from where I stood. It was a footprint, small, almost childlike, yet strangely defined. I stared at it, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. How could it be there? I hadn't seen it before, and I knew I hadn't walked in that part of the room. As I bent down to get a closer look, I saw another print, and then another, leading in a slow, deliberate path across the floor, towards the hallway, towards the basement door. The sight sent a wave of dread through me, and every instinct told me to turn around and leave, to get out of this house and never look back. But instead, I found myself following the footprints, each step filling me with a growing sense of unease. I moved through the dimly lit hallway, my gaze fixed on the faint outlines that seemed to guide me forward. They led directly to the basement door, a place I hadn't dared to go near since I'd arrived. It loomed at the end of the hall, dark and uninviting, its wood worn and splintered with age. The door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of darkness visible through the gap. I reached out, feeling my hand tremble as I touched the cold, rough wood. With a deep breath, I pushed it open, and a waft of stale, musty air hit me, carrying with it the faintest scent of something damp and decayed. The stairs stretched down into the darkness below, their wooden steps vanishing into a pitch-black void. I stood there, hesitating, torn between the urge to turn back and the inexplicable pull that seemed to draw me deeper. My hand gripped the doorframe as I peered down into the basement. The stairs seemed impossibly steep, each step cloaked in shadows that grew darker and more impenetrable the farther they descended. A thin film of dust coated the top step, but lower down, faint scuff marks disrupted the otherwise undisturbed surface. Someone or something had been down here recently, I thought, a realization that made my pulse quicken. Taking a deep breath, I felt the sharp, acrid scent of mildew sting my nose, mingling with a metallic tang that seemed to seep up from the depths below. Memories tugged at me, fragments of nights spent lying awake as a child, hearing odd creaks and muffled voices rising from beneath my bedroom floor. I'd always imagined there were creatures down there, strange beings that lurked in the dark, waiting for the moment I was brave or foolish enough to venture down and face them. My hand shook as I reached out to flip the basement light switch. With a flicker, a single dim bulb sputtered to life, casting a sickly yellow glow that barely penetrated the gloom. Shadows stretched along the walls, shifting as the bulb swayed gently on its frayed cord, illuminating only the top few steps before being swallowed by darkness below. The basement itself lay hidden, shrouded in a shadow that seemed to pulse and breathe, as though it were alive. With each step I took down the stairs, the air grew colder, thick with an unsettling silence that felt almost tangible, like I was moving through layers of something unseen and ancient. My shoes echoed against the wood, each sound amplified in the stillness, and I felt as though I were trespassing, intruding on something that had lain undisturbed for far too long. Reaching the halfway point, I stopped, my grip tightening on the banister. The silence was absolute, oppressive. Yet I could swear I heard something faint, a soft, rhythmic sound like breathing, slow and shallow, coming from the darkness just out of sight. My own breath caught in my throat, and I found myself holding it, as if afraid that even the slightest noise would disturb whatever lay below. At the bottom of the stairs, the faint glow from the single bulb barely reached, casting weak patches of light that seemed to dissolve before they could touch the floor. The basement stretched out before me in a sprawling, cluttered mess of old furniture, forgotten boxes, and decaying memories. Dust-covered shelves lined the walls, filled with strange artifacts of the past, worn books, tarnished picture frames, and brittle papers whose words had long faded into obscurity. As I moved further in, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust, I felt a strange sense of familiarity, as though I were walking through someone else's memories. My gaze fell upon an old, broken rocking chair in the corner, its wooden slats warped and splintered, yet I could almost see it moving, swaying slowly as though someone invisible were seated there, waiting. Then I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. Just in front of the chair lay another set of footprints, clear and defined in the thick dust, and much smaller than my own. They led in a direct line from the chair to the far side of the basement, where the darkness was at its heaviest, pooling like ink. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and I felt a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I followed the footprints, my heart pounding with each step. As I drew closer, I noticed something else, a faint glimmer, almost imperceptible, like the reflection of light on glass. Squinting, I could make out the shape of a small, cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. The frame was ornate, carved with intricate patterns that looked oddly familiar, like something I had seen in my dreams. As I stepped closer, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a visceral pull that urged me to look away. But something stronger, a mixture of morbid curiosity and an unspoken compulsion, kept me moving forward. I could see my reflection in the glass, distorted and fractured by the cracks that ran through it, splitting my face into fragments that seemed to shift and blend with the shadows around me. Then, in the reflection, I saw it, a figure standing just behind me, barely visible in the dim light, a small, shadowy shape that flickered at the edge of my vision. My breath hitched, and my body froze. I stared at the mirror, my heart pounding, too terrified to turn around, too afraid of what I might see if I did. The figure in the mirror was small, like a child, its features blurred and indistinct, yet unmistakably there. It stood motionless, watching me, and though I couldn't make out its eyes, I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, drilling into the back of my skull. My skin prickled, and a deep, primal fear gripped me, a fear that I hadn't felt since childhood, the same fear that had haunted me in this house so many years ago. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, dissolving into the shadows as though it had never been there. I blinked, my mind reeling, struggling to make sense of what I'd just seen. I forced myself to look around, scanning the basement, but it was empty, silent, as though nothing had disturbed it. But the sense of being watched lingered, thick and oppressive. I took a shaky breath and backed away from the mirror, unable to shake the feeling that whatever I had seen wasn't gone, not really. It was still there, hidden in the darkness, waiting, watching. I turned to leave, but my foot hit something solid. Looking down, I saw an old, dusty box partially buried beneath a pile of newspapers. My curiosity got the better of me, and I knelt to brush away the dust, revealing faded writing scrawled across the lid, to be opened only in case of emergency. The words struck me as odd, almost absurd in this setting, yet something about them seemed strangely urgent, a silent plea from the past. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid, revealing a small collection of items that seemed random at first, an old photograph, a small tin whistle, a worn leather-bound notebook. I picked up the photograph and held it to the dim light, feeling a cold wave of recognition. It was a picture of me, as a child, standing in the front yard of this house. But beside me stood a figure, blurry and half-visible, like a shadow cast by something unseen. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the image, trying to understand what I was seeing. There was no mistaking it. The figure looked exactly like the one I had just seen in the mirror, the same small, childlike shape that seemed to hover at the edges of my memory. A sudden chill washed over me, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched again, of something lurking just beyond the reach of the light. I stuffed the photo back into the box, my hand shaking, and closed the lid, as if by doing so I could somehow trap whatever was haunting me. I needed to get out of there, to escape the oppressive silence and the unsettling memories that clung to every corner of this house. But as I turned to head back up the stairs, the light bulb above me flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The shadows seemed to stretch, shifting and twisting, forming shapes that looked disturbingly familiar. And then, the light went out. The basement plunged into darkness, thick and absolute, swallowing every detail of the room. My breath hitched as the last traces of light disappeared, leaving me blind and vulnerable in the cold, cavernous space. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me, filling the room like a suffocating fog. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to climb those stairs as fast as I could, but my legs felt rooted to the spot, frozen by the chill of something far deeper than fear. I swallowed hard, straining to hear anything, even the faintest noise. But there was only silence, a silence so complete that it seemed to buzz in my ears, amplifying every small sound I made. My own breathing felt loud and foreign, each exhalation echoing in the emptiness. I stretched out a hand, feeling for the wall, hoping to orient myself in the dark, but my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic instead, the edge of the mirror. The mirror. My heart sank as I remembered what I had just seen in its cracked surface, the shadowy figure that had appeared behind me, watching. Even now, I could feel its presence, an invisible weight in the room, as though it were still there, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. The fear that had lingered at the edges of my mind as a child now rushed back with brutal clarity, a tidal wave of dread that left me shaking. As I groped blindly for the stairs, I heard it, a faint, whispering sound, barely audible yet unmistakable. It was the sound of something moving, slow and deliberate, brushing against the floor. The soft scrape sent chills down my spine, and I froze, every nerve on edge, straining to pinpoint the source. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, like 1,000 overlapping voices muttering words I couldn't understand. They seemed to come from every corner of the basement, filling the darkness, surrounding me. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the whispers seemed to seep through, slipping into my mind, filling me with a terror that felt ancient, primal. Just then, I felt a shift in the air, a cold gust that prickled my skin and made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It was coming from behind me, moving closer with each passing second. I dared not turn around, but I could feel it drawing nearer, an invisible presence creeping up on me, closing the distance between us. I could almost sense its form, small and shadowy, hovering just out of sight, waiting for me to acknowledge it. Summoning every ounce of courage, I took a step forward, inching toward where I thought the stairs might be. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices that seemed to claw at the edges of my sanity. I stumbled, my hand reaching out blindly, and finally, I felt the cool, rough wood of the stair railing beneath my fingertips. Relief surged through me, and I began to climb, taking each step slowly, trying to stay calm despite the whispers echoing in my ears. But then, halfway up the stairs, I felt it, a light tug on the hem of my shirt, gentle yet unmistakable. My breath caught, and I froze, my mind racing. It was as though something were trying to hold me back, a small, unseen hand reaching out from the darkness, clutching at me. Panic surged through me, and I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, my heart pounding. I could feel the weight of that unseen presence behind me, following, almost nipping at my heels as I climbed, desperate to escape. As I reached the top of the stairs, I slammed the basement door shut behind me, pressing my back against it as though I could somehow lock away whatever horrors lurked below. The whispers stopped abruptly, cut off by the door, and the silence that followed was so profound it left my ears ringing. I stood there, panting, my hands shaking as I struggled to steady myself. The dim light in the hallway felt blinding after the darkness of the basement, and for a moment, I just stood there, catching my breath, letting the quiet wash over me. But even as I tried to calm down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, that it was still there, lingering just beyond the door. The house was silent again, yet I could feel its presence pressing against the walls, filling every shadowed corner. I forced myself to move, to put distance between myself and the basement door, but with every step, the weight of its gaze followed me. As I reached the living room, I caught sight of the old family photo hanging on the wall, the one of my mother, father, and me, taken while I was a young boy. My eyes lingered on the image, drawn to the faded faces, especially my own, small and wide-eyed, staring out from a past that felt both distant and uncomfortably close. It was strange, but as I looked at the photograph, I could almost see that shadowy figure beside me, a dark shape that seemed to flicker at the edge of the frame. Another sound echoed through the house, this time a soft creak from the hallway. My skin prickled, and I turned slowly, half expecting to see that shadowy figure standing there, waiting for me. But the hallway was empty, filled only with the dim, fading light of the afternoon. A sudden, inexplicable urge filled me, compelling me to go back, to face whatever lay in the darkness of the basement. It made no sense, but the feeling was overpowering, as though something were calling to me, drawing me back to that place of shadows and whispers. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge, trying to shake off the pull, but it lingered, insistent. The house felt alive, humming with an energy that I couldn't understand, an invisible force that seemed to coil around me, urging me to confront it. I could feel its presence pressing against me, filling the air, thick and suffocating. And in that moment, I understood, whatever was in this house, whatever had haunted my childhood nightmares, it wasn't going to let me leave. Not until I faced it. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I forced myself to turn back toward the basement door. It loomed at the end of the hallway, half shrouded in shadows, silent and unassuming, yet somehow menacing. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, hesitating just long enough for the whispers to return, faint and distant, like echoes of something ancient and forgotten. With a final, determined breath, I opened the door, and a rush of cold air washed over me, carrying with it that same, faint scent of decay. The darkness of the basement beckoned, deep and impenetrable, a void that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I could feel it drawing me in, calling to me, filling my mind with fragmented images and half-remembered fears. Step by step, I descended once more into the black abyss, my heart pounding with each footfall, each creak of the old wooden stairs. The whispers grew louder, weaving through the air like tendrils, winding around me, pulling me deeper. The darkness seemed to close in, swallowing the last traces of light, until I was alone, trapped in the silent, suffocating void. And then, just as my foot reached the bottom step, the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive, a silence that felt alive, waiting. I held my breath, frozen, straining to hear anything, to see anything in the darkness. Then I felt it, a cold breath against my ear, soft and deliberate. My blood ran cold, and before I could move, a small, whispering voice filled the silence, so close it felt as though it were inside my mind. "Welcome home." The words hung in the air, chilling and intimate, resonating within me long after the whisper faded. My entire body froze, locked in place by an overwhelming sense of dread that seeped into my bones. That voice, it was faint, distant, yet achingly familiar, like the echo of a memory I couldn't quite grasp. I felt its presence ripple through the darkness, a low hum that seemed to reverberate from the walls themselves, as if the house were alive, breathing around me. "Welcome home," it repeated, softer this time, almost a hiss. My mind raced, struggling to grasp reality. Was this some nightmare that I had stumbled into, a memory made tangible by the oppressive silence of the basement? Or was something darker at play, some presence that had been lurking here all these years, waiting? I took a tentative step backward, but the ground felt unsteady beneath me, as though I were standing on the edge of a cliff with the void yawning just below. I reached out, feeling for anything solid, but my fingers met only empty air. In the darkness, I could no longer see the stairs or the walls, just an endless, suffocating blackness that pressed in on me from all sides. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a faint glimmer in the corner of the room where the cracked mirror leaned against the wall. Though broken, the mirror's surface seemed to pulse with a soft, unnatural glow, casting warped shadows that stretched and twisted across the floor. The edges of the mirror were blurred, hazy, as if the glass were melting, dripping down in slow, viscous streams. Against every instinct, I took a step closer, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion to understand, to see. My reflection came into view, faint and fractured, split by the cracks in the glass. But something was wrong. The figure in the mirror didn't match my movements. It stood perfectly still, watching me with an eerie calm, as though it were a separate entity entirely, trapped behind the glass. I swallowed hard, my eyes locked on the reflection. Then, slowly, deliberately, it began to smile. The sight sent a shockwave of terror through me, a fear so deep and visceral that it made my knees weaken. The smile was too wide, stretching impossibly across its face, a grotesque parody of human emotion. And within that smile, I could see rows of teeth, sharp and jagged, glinting in the faint light like the edges of a broken blade. The figure's hand lifted, pressing against the other side of the glass, mirroring my own hand as I reached out in a daze, compelled by a force I couldn't resist. My fingers brushed the cold surface of the mirror, and in that moment, a chill raced up my arm, spreading through my body like ice. The air thickened, and the shadows seemed to swell, coiling around me, pulling me deeper into the dark. Then, without warning, the mirror cracked, a splintering sound that echoed through the basement. The crack spread across the glass like lightning, a web of fractures that shattered my reflection into 1,000 tiny shards. I stumbled back, gasping, the cold air slicing into my lungs as I struggled to catch my breath. A faint whisper drifted from the mirror, barely audible, yet it sent a shiver down my spine. "Do you remember me?" The voice was softer now, almost childlike, filled with a quiet, haunting sadness that tugged at the edges of my memory. Images flickered in my mind, blurred faces, half-formed memories of days spent hiding from the shadows in this very house. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond my sight, had always been there, even as a child. But I had buried those memories, convinced they were nothing more than a child's overactive imagination. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to speak, though my voice sounded weak and hollow in the empty space. Who are you?" Silence answered me, thick and heavy, pressing down with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Then, slowly, a figure began to materialize in the darkness, emerging from the shadows like a wraith. It was small, hunched, barely the size of a child, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin, draped in tattered clothing that hung from its bony frame like rags. Its face was obscured, hidden in shadow, yet I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It simply watched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as though studying me, assessing me. The silence between us stretched, filled only by the soft rustling of fabric as the creature shifted, its movements slow and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down. "Why did you come back?" the voice whispered again, filling the room, though the figure's lips never moved. It felt as though the sound were coming from all around me, from the very walls themselves, reverberating in my mind, growing louder with each repetition. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My mind was a whirl of confusion, my thoughts tangled and chaotic, as I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing, what I was feeling. The memories that had haunted me as a child, the strange, half-formed fears that I had buried, were all rushing back, overwhelming me with a force that left me breathless. I took a step back, desperate to escape, but the shadows seemed to close in, pressing against me, holding me in place. The figure's head tilted further, its gaze never leaving mine, and I felt a wave of nausea, a sick, twisting sensation that gnawed in my stomach. Then, in a sudden, jerking motion, the figure raised a hand, pointing directly at me. Its fingers were long and thin, almost skeletal, with nails that looked sharp and ragged. My pulse quickened as the creature's hand hovered there, frozen in an accusatory gesture, and I could feel the weight of its silent accusation pressing down on me, filling me with a guilt I couldn't explain. "You left," it whispered, its voice barely more than a breath. "You forgot." The words hit me like a blow, and I staggered, my back pressing against the cold, damp wall as I struggled to catch my breath. The creature's voice was laced with pain, with a sorrow so deep it felt like a wound. Memories flickered in my mind, fleeting images of hiding in the shadows, of feeling alone, abandoned, haunted by something I couldn't see. And in that moment, I understood. This thing, this creature, wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was a part of me, a fragment of my past, a remnant of the fears I had left behind when I fled this house all those years ago. The realization struck with a force that left me breathless. This wasn't just a ghost or a figment of imagination. This was something more insidious, a memory brought to life, an echo of fears I had never truly left behind. It was the shadow of my own past, staring back at me from the dark, waiting. The figure took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, each step bringing with it a cold wave that chilled me to the core. Its hand remained outstretched, a silent accusation that seemed to hold the weight of all the years I'd spent trying to forget, to leave this house and everything it contained behind. "You left," it repeated, and this time the voice carried a tone of betrayal, a depth of sorrow that twisted in my chest like a knife. My throat tightened as memories surged to the surface, fragments of those long, sleepless nights spent hiding under the covers, certain that something lurked just beyond the edges of the light. The creature's face remained obscured, but its eyes, those eyes were all too familiar. They were wide, dark, filled with a depth of sorrow that felt all too human, yet ancient, as if they had watched and waited in the shadows for a lifetime. I tried to look away, to shield myself from that piercing gaze, but the darkness around me felt alive, pressing in, pulling me closer to the creature's accusing stare. "Why did you leave me?" The words seemed to echo in my mind, resonating with a pain that felt too personal, too raw. My own voice caught in my throat as guilt bubbled to the surface, thick and heavy, mingling with the fear that tightened like a vice around my chest. I didn't have an answer. At least, not one that would make sense to the thing that stood before me, clutching at the frayed remnants of the past. Summoning what little courage I had left, I whispered, "I was a child." I didn't know, but even as the words left my lips, they felt hollow, weak. The excuses of a frightened boy who had run from the shadows rather than face them. I had convinced myself that leaving would free me, that distance would dissolve the fear. But now, standing here in the dim, oppressive darkness of this basement, I knew the truth. I had only buried it, hidden it, and it had waited, patiently, feeding off my denial. The figure tilted its head, its gaze unwavering, as if peering directly into my soul. "You remember now," it whispered, almost a statement rather than a question. And it was true. The memories were rushing back, each one sharper and more vivid than the last. I remembered the nights when I'd felt something cold and heavy settle over me, pinning me to my bed, the shadows at the edges of my room seeming to pulse, to watch, to wait. I remembered the countless nights I'd spent alone, unable to call for help, terrified that acknowledging the presence would make it real. And I remembered the final night, the night I had left this house, vowing never to return. I had convinced myself that leaving was my salvation. But here, in this basement, the weight of that memory bore down on me like a stone, dragging me back into the darkness I had tried so hard to escape. The bed was small, covered in a faded quilt that my mother had stitched by hand. Toys lay scattered on the floor, relics of a childhood I had tried so hard to escape. A sense of melancholy filled the air, mingling with the musty scent of dust and neglect. I stepped inside, feeling as though I were walking through a memory, a ghostly echo of the life I had once lived within these walls. My eyes landed on a small, battered teddy bear sitting on the edge of the bed, its fur matted and threadbare. I remembered clinging to that bear on the nights when the shadows felt too close, when the whispers grew too loud. It had been a comfort, a silent protector against the fears that lurked in the darkness. But now, in the dim light of the room, the bear's black button eyes seemed to stare back at me with a strange intensity, as though it held memories of its own, secrets it had kept hidden over the years. I picked up the bear, its soft, warm fabric familiar beneath my fingers, and for a moment I was transported back to those nights, the feeling of fear so vivid it was as though I were reliving it. The shadows would press in, the whispers would grow louder, and I would hide beneath the covers, clutching the bear, convinced that it could protect me from whatever watched me from the dark. A shiver ran down my spine as I recalled one particular night, the last night I had ever slept in this room. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. The air had felt thick, suffocating, and the shadows had seemed to pulse, shifting and twisting in ways that defied explanation. I had felt something watching me, a presence that filled the room with a cold, crawling dread, a sensation so intense that I could barely breathe. And then, I had heard it, a soft, raspy whisper, so faint that I almost thought I had imagined it. It had come from the corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest, and it had spoken my name, a single, drawn-out syllable that sent a chill through my bones. I had clutched the bear tighter, my heart racing, as the whisper continued, weaving a web of words that I couldn't understand, yet filled me with a terror that I could feel in every cell of my body. Now, standing here in the empty room, the memory felt as real as if it were happening again. The shadows in the corners seemed to darken, deepening into something almost tangible, something that seemed to watch, to wait. The bear slipped from my fingers, landing on the bed with a soft thud, and I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to leave, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this room that held so many nightmares. But as I turned to go, a flicker of movement caught my eye. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift, to swell, forming a shape that was almost human yet somehow wrong, twisted and distorted. I felt my pulse quicken, my breath catching in my throat as the shape moved, its form flickering like a flame, barely visible yet undeniably present. The air grew colder, a chill that seeped into my skin, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My eyes remained fixed on the shadowed corner, unable to look away, drawn by a mixture of fear and fascination. And then, slowly, the shape took a step forward, emerging from the darkness with a strange, halting motion, as though it were learning how to move, how to exist within the confines of this room. The figure was small, childlike, yet its proportions were all wrong, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, those eyes were black, empty, devoid of any light, yet filled with a depth of sorrow that felt ancient, eternal. I recognized those eyes. They were the same eyes that had stared back at me from the mirror, the same eyes that had watched me from the shadows all those years ago. I took a step back, my mind racing, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this creature as possible. but my legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor, as though the room itself were holding me in place, forcing me to confront the nightmare that had haunted me since childhood. The figure tilted its head, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Its mouth opened, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched far too wide, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. The sight was so grotesque, so wrong, that it felt like a physical blow, a wave of nausea rolling over me as I fought to keep my gaze steady. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, a voice that sounded both childlike and ancient, it spoke. "You came back," it said, the words dripping with a quiet malice, a hunger that sent a shiver through my entire body. "You came back to me." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The figure took another step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls pressing in, the air growing thicker, suffocating. I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and unrelenting, a weight that bore down on me with a force that made it hard to breathe. "You left me here," it continued, each word a sharp, painful accusation. "All alone. You thought you could forget me." My mind reeled, every memory, every fragment of fear from my childhood resurfacing with a clarity that was almost painful. I had left this house, left this creature, thinking I could escape, that distance would free me. But I had only abandoned it, leaving it to fester in the shadows, to grow and wait. I'm sorry," I managed to choke out, the words barely audible, trembling with the weight of years of fear and guilt. The words "I'm sorry" felt hollow, inadequate in the face of the creature's gaze. Its black, soulless eyes never wavered as it took another slow, deliberate step toward me. The smile on its face stretched wider, too wide, revealing a darkness inside its mouth that seemed to go on forever. That void was consuming, like staring into an abyss, and I had to force myself to look away from the impossible depth within it. It was as though it fed on my apology, on my guilt, each word strengthening the connection between us. A chill settled over me, creeping through my veins like ice. I tried to back up, to put distance between us, but my body refused to obey, held captive by a force beyond my understanding. The air around me felt thick, heavy, as if it were pressing down, rooting me to the spot, binding me in place. "You left me," it repeated, and this time its voice was softer, almost mournful. But beneath that sorrow lay something far more dangerous, something dark and ravenous. "You left me to rot in the dark, and you thought you could just forget." I swallowed hard, the bitterness of fear mingling with the shame that rose within me. In my mind, I saw flashes of that last night here as a child, the terror, the whispers, the shadows that had seemed to close in on me. I had felt so trapped back then, helpless against the darkness that surrounded me. And in my desperation, I had convinced myself that leaving would make it all go away. But now, standing here, with this thing in front of me, I realized that my escape had been nothing more than an illusion. I had buried the fear, locked it away in the recesses of my mind, yet it had waited, simmering in the darkness, growing stronger with every year, until I returned to awaken it. The creature took another step, and I could feel its icy breath against my skin. The smell was damp, earthy, tinged with decay, as though it had been waiting in a place untouched by light or air. My heart pounded in my chest, a wild, frantic beat that seemed to echo in the stillness of the room. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to escape this nightmare, but I couldn't move, couldn't look away from the creature's gaze. It raised one pale, skeletal hand, and for a moment it simply hovered in the air between us, its fingers curling and uncurling in a slow, hypnotic motion. There was something strangely familiar about that gesture, a twisted parody of the way a child might reach out for comfort, for reassurance. The sight sent a shiver through me, a sickening realization that this creature, this twisted reflection of my own fear, had been born from my loneliness, my desperation. Its fingers brushed against my cheek, cold and clammy, and I felt a surge of panic, a primal terror that left me breathless. The touch was light, almost gentle, but it carried with it a weight, a depth of feeling that went beyond the physical. I could feel its sorrow, its anger, a lifetime's worth of pain and resentment simmering beneath the surface. "You were supposed to protect me," it whispered, its voice so soft, so broken, that it almost sounded human. "You were supposed to stay." The accusation hit me with the force of a blow, a painful reminder of the nights I had spent huddled under the covers, clinging to whatever scraps of comfort I could find. I had been so young, so afraid, convinced that if I just stayed quiet, if I just kept my eyes closed, the darkness would go away. But it hadn't. It had lingered, a shadow that I could never fully escape. My chest tightened as memories flooded back, fragments of a childhood defined by fear and isolation. I had been so alone back then, locked in a world of shadows and silence, with no one to turn to, no one who could understand. And in my desperation, I had created something, a companion, a guardian, a protector. But that protector had twisted over time, warping into this creature, this manifestation of my deepest fears. I was afraid, I whispered, my voice trembling. I didn't know how to face it. I thought leaving would make it all go away. The creature's gaze softened, just for a moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of understanding, of something almost human beneath the darkness. But then, its expression shifted, hardening into something colder, more dangerous. "You abandoned me," it said, its voice a low, menacing growl. "You left me to the shadows, to the silence. And now, I am all that you are." The words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the years I had spent running from myself, from the darkness that I had tried so hard to bury. I had convinced myself that I could leave it all behind, that I could escape the fear and the loneliness that had haunted me. But now, standing here, with this creature born in my own mind, I realized the truth. I couldn't escape what I carried within me. The creature's hand tightened on my shoulder, its grip cold and unyielding, and I felt a surge of despair, a realization that this was a battle I could never truly win. I could run, I could hide, but the darkness would always be there, lurking just beyond the edges of the light, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. "You belong to me," it whispered, its voice laced with a quiet, chilling certainty. "We are one, bound by fear and loneliness. And you cannot leave what is a part of you." The words wrapped around me like chains, binding me to the darkness, to the fear that had defined me for so long. But as I looked into the creature's eyes, I felt something stir within me, a spark of defiance, a refusal to be consumed by the shadows. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I won't let you control me. Not anymore." The creature's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise crossing its twisted features. For the first time, I felt a sense of power, a strength that had lain dormant within me, buried beneath years of fear and doubt. I had spent my life running, hiding, but now, faced with the darkness I had tried so hard to escape, I realized that the only way to break free was to confront it. The creature's grip loosened, and I felt a strange sense of release, a lightness that spread through me like a breath of fresh air. The shadows around us seemed to waver, to recede, as though they too felt the strength of my resolve. "You may be a part of me," I continued, my voice steady. "But you don't define me. You are just a memory, a shadow. And I am not afraid of you anymore." The creature's eyes darkened, and for a moment, I thought it would strike, that it would consume me in a final act of vengeance. But instead, it took a step back, its form flickering, weakening, as though my words had drained it of its power. "You cannot erase me," it hissed, its voice fading to a whisper. "I will always be here, in the shadows, waiting." And then, with a final, guttural snarl, the creature dissolved, its form dissipating into the darkness, leaving nothing but a faint, lingering chill in the air. The silence that followed was deep, almost peaceful, as though the house itself had exhaled, releasing the years of tension and fear that had held it in thrall. I stood there, alone in the quiet, my heart still racing, my mind reeling from the confrontation. The darkness had retreated, but I knew it wasn't gone. It would always be there, a part of me, a reminder of the fear that had shaped me. But now, for the first time, I felt a sense of acceptance, a quiet understanding that I didn't have to run from it anymore. The house felt lighter as I made my way back down the hallway, the shadows no longer pressing in, no longer watching. It was as though the confrontation had lifted a weight, a burden that I had carried for far too long. I reached the front door, and as I stepped outside, I felt the cool night air wash over me, cleansing, refreshing. I looked back at the house, its windows dark and silent, and I knew that I was leaving a part of myself behind, the part that had been trapped in the shadows, defined by fear and loneliness. The house would always hold those memories, those echoes of a childhood shaped by terror. But I no longer belonged to it. With one last glance at the house, I turned and walked away, my steps steady, my heart lighter. The darkness would always be a part of me, a shadow that lingered just beyond the edges of the light. But now, I knew that I didn't have to be afraid. I was free. I walked down the empty street, the night air sharp and cool against my skin. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of calm, as though a weight had been lifted from my chest. Yet, a small, lingering unease hung at the edges of my mind, a faint whisper of the darkness I had left behind. The town was quiet, the kind of silence that only exists in the depths of night, where every sound feels amplified, every shadow deeper. The streetlights cast pools of light on the ground, but between them, the darkness seemed denser, thicker. It felt as though the shadows themselves were watching me, waiting for a moment of weakness. I dismissed the thought, convincing myself it was just the remnants of fear, a habit from years of running from something I couldn't fully understand. The more distance I put between myself and that house, the more I felt a gradual ease and acceptance of what had happened. I had faced something I'd been avoiding my entire life, a specter from my past that I had long pretended didn't exist. And in some way, I had won, not by defeating it, but by acknowledging it, by finally looking it in the eyes. Yet as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't entirely over. There was a subtle tension in the air, an unnatural stillness that reminded me of the moments just before a storm. I tried to brush it off, to let the night air wash away the remnants of fear, but it clung to me, a shadow I couldn't escape. I turned onto a side street, one I hadn't seen in years. The houses here were old, almost abandoned looking, their facades worn and crumbling under the weight of time. These were the parts of town that people tended to forget, the places that lay just beyond the comfort of the familiar. As a child, I had avoided these streets, convinced they held secrets I wasn't meant to uncover. Now, as an adult, they felt oddly comforting, a reminder that I was no longer that scared, vulnerable child. But as I walked, something strange happened. The air grew colder, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and refuses to let go. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickened my pace, telling myself it was just the night, just the cold. But then I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Don't leave." I stopped, my heart pounding. The voice was familiar, achingly so, a ghostly echo of the creature's words. But there was no one there, only shadows stretching across the cracked pavement. I shook my head, trying to dispel the sound, to convince myself it was just a trick of my mind, a lingering echo from the confrontation I'd left behind. Yet the voice persisted, growing louder, more insistent, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. "You can't run," it whispered, each word filled with a quiet menace, a warning I couldn't ignore. "You can't hide from what's inside." The words sent a jolt of fear through me, a reminder that no matter how far I ran, I could never fully escape. The creature might be gone, dissolved into the shadows, but it had left a mark, a piece of itself buried within me, waiting for the right moment to resurface. I forced myself to keep moving, my footsteps echoing in the silence. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, every whisper of the wind took on a sinister tone. It was as though the night itself had come alive, filled with unseen eyes that watched my every move. The street grew darker, the light from the street lamps fading until I was left in near total darkness. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone to use as a flashlight, but the screen was dead, refusing to respond. A surge of panic rose within me, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. The darkness was oppressive, wrapping around me like a shroud, suffocating in its intensity. My mind raced, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to run, but I forced myself to take a step forward, and then another. I couldn't let the fear control me, not again. But as I walked, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from every direction. "You can't escape us." The voices surrounded me, filling the air with a quiet, mocking laughter that sent chills down my spine. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing, to silence the pounding of my heart. But the voices only grew louder, their words mingling with the sound of footsteps, soft and shuffling, as though something was moving just beyond the edge of my vision. I turned, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there, only shadows that seemed to writhe and twist, taking on shapes that defied logic. My mind screamed at me to flee, but I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the darkness, watching me with eyes that glowed faintly in the night. It was the creature, or something that bore an uncanny resemblance to it, a twisted shadow of my fear-given form. But this time, it wasn't alone. Beside it stood other figures, indistinct but undeniably real, their eyes gleaming with the same predatory hunger, the same malice. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. The figures moved closer, their steps slow and deliberate, as though savoring the fear that radiated from me. I could feel their presence, a tangible weight that pressed down on me, suffocating in its intensity. "Did you really think you could leave?" one of them whispered, its voice a low, mocking drawl that sent a shiver through me. "Did you really think you could forget?" I tried to speak, to shout, but no sound came out. The figures loomed closer, their faces hidden in the darkness, but I could feel their eyes on me, feel the weight of their gaze as they closed in, their movements slow and predatory. I backed away, my breaths coming in short, panicked gasps, but there was nowhere to go, no escape from the nightmare that surrounded me. One of the figures stepped forward, its hand reaching out, and I felt a cold, clammy touch on my skin, a sensation that sent a jolt of terror through me. The darkness seemed to close in, pressing against me, suffocating, until I could barely breathe, barely think. "Face us," it whispered, its voice soft, almost gentle, but filled with an underlying menace. "You cannot run from yourself." The word struck me like a blow, a reminder that no matter how far I ran, I could never escape the shadows within. They would always be there, lurking just beyond the edges of the light, waiting for a moment of weakness, a chink in my armor. And in that moment, I understood the truth. I hadn't defeated the creature, hadn't banished it from my life. I had merely pushed it aside, locked it away, but it had been waiting, growing stronger with every year, every moment of fear and doubt. The figures closed in, their voices a low, murmuring chant that filled the air with a sense of dread, a reminder that the past could never truly be erased. I could feel their hands on me, cold and unyielding, a reminder of the darkness that had shaped me, defined me. And as I stood there, surrounded by shadows, I felt a sense of inevitability, a realization that I would never truly be free. The darkness was a part of me, a reflection of the fears and doubts I had tried so hard to bury. It would always be there, lurking just beyond the light, a reminder that I could never escape what I carried within. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with a cacophony of voices that drowned out everything else, until there was only darkness, only the shadows that pressed in, consuming me. And in that moment, I realized that the true horror wasn't in the creature or the figures that surrounded me. It was in the knowledge that I would never be free, that the fear, the darkness, would always be a part of me. As the figures closed in, their voices mingling in a chorus of despair, I felt myself slipping, sinking into the darkness that surrounded me, until there was nothing left but shadows, silence, and the echo of forgotten fears. The darkness pressed in around me, a suffocating shroud that threatened to swallow me whole. The voices rose and fell like a tide, a relentless chorus of past regrets and hidden fears. I struggled to keep my footing, my breath shallow and ragged, each inhalation a reminder of the dread that encircled me. "Why did you come back?" one of the figures taunted, its voice a low growl that vibrated through the air. "You thought you could escape your past, but it's always waiting, always watching. You're not free, you never were." I could feel the weight of its words pressing down on me, the truth behind them like a cold blade against my skin. The shadows pulsed with an energy that was both familiar and terrifying, each one a fragment of my past, memories of fear, loneliness, and the suffocating isolation that had haunted my childhood. "Look at us," another voice whispered, closer now, echoing in the depths of my mind. "We're your fears, your doubts. You can't outrun us. You can't hide." The figures moved closer, their shapes shifting and flickering like candle flames caught in a breeze. I turned to flee, but the darkness closed in, wrapping around me like a serpent, coiling tighter with every panicked movement. I stumbled backward, my hands flailing in the inky blackness, searching for something, anything, to anchor me to reality. "Face us," the voice urged again, more insistent now, tinged with a menacing glee. "Only by confronting us can you be free." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the voices, the figures, the paralyzing fear that threatened to engulf me. But when I opened them again, I was not in that desolate street. Instead, I found myself standing in the hallway of my childhood home, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and the air thick with dust. The scent of musty wood and forgotten memories filled my lungs, and a wave of nostalgia washed over me. But with it came the darkness, creeping along the edges of my vision, reminding me that this place was steeped in pain. "Welcome back," a soft voice echoed, and I turned to see my younger self standing there, a child with wide, innocent eyes that mirrored the terror I had felt all those years ago. "Why did you come back?" the child asked, voice trembling with fear. "Didn't you promise to stay away?" The sight of my younger self brought a sharp pang of guilt and longing. I had been running for so long, trying to escape the echoes of my past. But here it was, standing before me in the form of the child I once was, fragile, vulnerable, and trapped in a world of shadows. I thought I could face it, I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could finally confront what haunted me. But you didn't, the child cried, taking a step back as if afraid of me. You're still scared. You're still running. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words caught in my throat. The truth of the child's statement cut deeper than any blade. I had come back, not as a conqueror, but as someone still gripped by fear, still entangled in the very web I had tried to escape. Face it, the child shouted again, and suddenly the walls of the hallway began to shift and dissolve, the house crumbling into shadows that writhed and twisted, becoming the very darkness that had chased me. I was pulled into a swirling vortex, a chaotic maelstrom of memories and fears. I saw glimpses of my past flash before me, moments of terror in the dark, the laughter of children that turned to screams, and the oppressive weight of isolation that had suffocated me for so long. And then, just as suddenly, I found myself standing in the old abandoned playground where I had spent countless hours as a child. The rusted swings creaked in the wind, their echoes mingling with the whispers of the shadows. The night sky hung heavy overhead, and a chill wrapped around me, deepening the sense of foreboding. Do you remember? A familiar voice broke through the silence, and I turned to see a figure emerge from the darkness. It was my childhood friend, Alex, his face twisted in an unsettling grin, a reflection of the innocence lost to time and fear. We used to play here, he said, his voice laced with a mocking tone. Do you remember the games we played? The fears we shared? The playground came alive with echoes of laughter and screams, ghostly images of children playing, but something was wrong. The laughter turned sinister, the games twisted into something malevolent, shadows lurking behind every swing, every slide. I tried to forget, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I tried to leave it all behind. But you can't forget, Alex taunted, stepping closer, the shadows flaring around him. You can't escape what we were. Look around you, we are everywhere. We are in the darkness you fear. The playground began to warp, the swings twisting into grotesque shapes, the laughter morphing into cries of terror. I stumbled back, feeling the weight of my past pressing down on me, dragging me deeper into the nightmare. Face it. Alex shouted again, his voice cutting through the chaos. You have to confront us. You can't run forever. The shadows danced around me, the memories coiling like tendrils, threatening to pull me under. I felt the panic rising in my chest, the overwhelming urge to flee, to escape. But I knew I couldn't run anymore. With a shaky breath, I summoned the courage I had long thought lost. I'm not afraid of you, I shouted, my voice rising above the cacophony. You don't control me. In that moment, the shadows hesitated, flickering like candle flames caught in a breeze. The laughter faded, replaced by a heavy silence that filled the air. I stepped forward, pushing back against the darkness, willing myself to face the fears that had haunted me for so long. I am not that child anymore, I declared, my voice steady and strong. I refuse to let you define me. The shadows recoiled, swirling away from the light I had ignited within myself. I felt the weight of their presence begin to dissipate, the air growing lighter as I took another step forward. Face your fear, Alex's voice echoed softly, more of a plea now than a taunt. Face the darkness within you. With that, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the memories to wash over me without fear. I let the weight of my childhood fears and regrets settle on my heart, acknowledging each one without letting it consume me. And in that moment of acceptance, the playground transformed. The darkness receded, the rusted swings becoming vibrant and alive, the laughter of children returning, but this time it felt warm and inviting. The shadows faded, leaving behind only a faint whisper, a reminder of what had been but no longer held power over me. As the light enveloped me, I opened my eyes to find myself standing alone in the park, the night sky above twinkling with stars, the air fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. I felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of fear that had once consumed me. But just as I began to breathe a sigh of relief, a chill swept through the air, sending a shiver down my spine. The shadows lurked at the edge of the park, a reminder that while I had faced my fears, the battle was far from over. I stood in the park, the remnants of my past swirling in the breeze like fallen leaves. The darkness that had once suffocated me now lingered at the edges of my vision, a silent predator waiting for the moment to strike. Despite the warmth of the night and the twinkling stars above, I felt a gnawing anxiety in the pit of my stomach, the awareness that my journey was not yet over. "Face your fears," I whispered to myself, the words echoing in the stillness. The shadows crept closer, their presence thickening the air around me. I took a step forward, determined to confront whatever awaited me. As I moved deeper into the park, I could hear the distant sound of laughter, a haunting melody that reminded me of my childhood. It was a sound I had once cherished, but now it felt twisted, mocking. The joyful cries of children playing turned sinister, twisting in the darkness like the shadows that loomed over me. "Do you remember this place?" The voice of my childhood friend Alex echoed, a taunting lilt in his tone. "You thought you could escape, but we are everywhere." "Confronting your fears is only the beginning," Alex's voice replied, weaving through the laughter like a serpent. "What happens when you realize that they are a part of you? You can't separate yourself from them." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the noise. I could feel the memories pushing against my consciousness, each one a sharp shard of pain. But this time, I refused to let them drown me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remember why I had returned to this place, not just to confront my fears, but to reclaim my life. "Show yourself," I shouted into the darkness, the sound of my own voice surprising me. "I won't hide anymore." Silence enveloped me, thick and heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And then, slowly, the shadows began to coalesce, forming into familiar figures, the children from my past, their faces twisted in fear and anger. "You abandoned us," one of them cried, a girl with pigtails and a bright red dress. "You left us here." "I didn't leave you," I protested, stepping closer, my heart racing. "I was trying to protect you, to protect myself." But they only laughed, a cruel sound that reverberated through the night. "Protect yourself? You can't protect yourself from the truth. We are the truth." The playground behind them warped further, the swings creaking ominously as if responding to their words. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me, but I stood my ground, clenching my fists at my sides. "No more!" I shouted, forcing my voice to be steady. "I refuse to let you control me. You don't own me." The shadows seemed to flicker at my words, the laughter dying down into a low murmur. I took a step forward, heart pounding, as I faced the child in the red dress. "I know you're scared. I am too. But I can't keep running from this." With each word, I felt the darkness tremble, the figures wavering like mirages in the desert heat. I was scared of being alone, of being abandoned, of facing the things I couldn't control. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "But I've realized that I can't let that fear define me. I can't let it control my life anymore." As I spoke, the playground began to shift once more, the colors brightening, the shadows shrinking back as if retreating from the light of my determination. The children's faces softened, their twisted expressions turning to looks of curiosity and then understanding. Face your fear, I repeated, feeling a surge of hope. You don't have to be trapped in the darkness. We can be free together. The child in the red dress stepped forward, her eyes searching mine. What if we can't escape? She asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. What if we are always stuck in this place? I reached out, my hand trembling, but determined. We can break the cycle. We have to confront the truth of what happened and accept it, together. The shadows around us flickered, hesitant, as if weighing my words. Slowly, the other children began to step forward, inching closer to me. The laughter faded, replaced by a tentative silence as they considered my offer. I don't want to be afraid anymore, I whispered, the words escaping my lips like a prayer. I want to move on. I want us all to move on. As the final echoes of laughter faded, the playground transformed around us. The rusted swings shone bright, the colors vibrant, and the air filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. The children looked at each other, uncertainty still flickering in their eyes, but the shadows began to recede, pulled back by the light of my resolve. And then, just as I thought we had reached a breakthrough, a cold wind swept through the park, snatching the warmth from the air. The laughter turned back to whispers, the shadows swirling ominously, rising like a tide to drown out the light. No! I shouted, my heart racing. You can't take this from us. But the shadows were relentless, closing in, their whispers growing louder, drowning out my voice. Panic surged through me, threatening to overwhelm everything I had fought for. I turned to face the children, their faces now set in expressions of terror. We have to stand together, I urged, desperation creeping into my voice. We can't let the darkness win. But as I reached out for them, I felt an icy hand grip my wrist, pulling me back. I turned to see Alex, his grin twisted and malevolent, the shadows coiling around him like serpents. Did you really think you could escape? He hissed, his eyes gleaming with malice. You're still trapped, still afraid. You can't outrun your past. With that, the darkness surged forward, enveloping me, pulling me down into the depths of despair. The laughter of the children faded into a chilling silence, and I felt myself slipping away, the light extinguished as I was swallowed by the shadows. As the darkness enveloped me, a cacophony of voices rose around me, drowning out my thoughts. Panic surged through my veins, and I felt the icy grip of fear tightening around my heart. I struggled against it, fighting to find my footing in the swirling abyss. Let go! I screamed into the void, my voice swallowed by the shadows. I won't let you take me. But the darkness only tightened its hold, and I felt myself being pulled deeper, sinking into the depths of my own despair. Memories surged back, vivid and sharp, the nights spent trembling under the covers, the faces of the children I had lost, the feeling of isolation that had haunted me for years. I could feel the weight of their fear pressing down on me, and it was overwhelming. Each whisper in the shadows was a reminder of my failures, my regrets. It was all too much. Face your fears, a voice broke through the chaos, clearer than the rest. It was my own, ringing with determination, echoing through the darkness. I focused on that voice, clinging to it like a lifeline. I began to fight back against the shadows, summoning the strength I had found within myself. You don't control me, I shouted, my voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. I am more than my fears. I refuse to be defined by the past. The shadows hesitated, their grip faltering for just a moment, and I took advantage of it. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I envisioned a light inside me, glowing and warm. I focused on it, allowing it to fill my heart, spreading like wildfire through my body. "Release me," I yelled, feeling the light push against the darkness. "I will not be afraid anymore." With each word, the darkness recoiled, the shadows pulling back like a tide, revealing glimpses of light amidst the chaos. The air grew warmer, the whispers transforming into soft echoes of laughter, the laughter of children, innocent and free. I pushed forward, using the light as my shield. The darkness writhed around me, but I would not let it consume me. "I see you," I shouted, my voice resonating with strength. "I see all of you." Suddenly, the swirling shadows began to form into familiar shapes, the faces of the children I had once known, their features illuminated by the light I had summoned. They looked at me with a mix of fear and hope, their expressions softening. Together, I urged, reaching out to them. "We can break free." With a collective gasp, the children stepped forward, their hands reaching out to mine. "We're scared," one of them admitted, the girl in the red dress standing at the forefront. "What if we can't escape?" I squeezed her hand, determination flooding through me. "We can. We have to face our fears together. We are stronger than the darkness." As they grasped my hands, I felt a surge of energy coursing through us, our collective light pushing against the shadows. The darkness writhed and twisted, howling in rage, but we stood firm, our resolve unyielding. "Face your fears," I called out once more, our voices blending into a powerful chorus. The light grew brighter, illuminating the park around us. The laughter transformed into a melody of joy, filling the air with a sense of warmth and belonging. "Let us go," the children cried in unison, their voices echoing with newfound strength. We refused to be trapped. The shadows screamed, their forms dissipating like smoke in the wind, the oppressive weight of fear lifting. I could feel the light expanding, enveloping us in a cocoon of warmth and safety. In that moment, everything changed. The park transformed around us, the once decaying playground blooming with vibrant colors, life flooding back into the world we had feared for so long. The rusted swings creaked gently, the laughter of children echoing in harmony. "I can't believe we did it," the girl in the red dress said, her voice filled with awe. "We faced them together." "Yes," I replied, a smile breaking across my face. "We did." But just as I thought we had triumphed, a cold gust of wind swept through the park, chilling the air. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, a dark shape lurking just beyond the light, reminding me that while we had confronted our fears, the battle was far from over. "No," I whispered, dread creeping back into my heart. "It can't be over." The figure stepped forward, revealing itself as Alex, his expression a mix of anger and sorrow. "You think you can escape me?" he sneered, the shadows swirling around him like a storm. "I am your fear. I am a part of you." "No!" I shouted, my voice ringing with defiance. "You don't own me. I've faced my fears, and I won't let you take that away." The light surrounding us pulsed, but Alex's shadowy form surged forward, threatening to extinguish it. "You're wrong. As long as you have fear in your heart, I will always be here." I felt the weight of his words like a leaden weight in my chest, but I refused to back down. "Fear may be a part of me," I said, my voice steady, "but it does not define who I am. I am stronger than you think." With that declaration, I turned to the children, their eyes wide with uncertainty. "We can't let him win. We have to stand together." The girl in the red dress nodded, her expression resolute. "We've come this far. We can't give up now. As we linked hands once more, I felt the strength of our bond, the warmth of our collective light pushing against the darkness. Together, we would face Alex. Together, we would reclaim our power. Face the truth. I cried, our voices rising as we summoned the light within us. We are not afraid. The shadows howled, swirling violently, but we stood firm. The playground illuminated with a brilliant glow, the colors vibrant and alive, casting away the encroaching darkness. Let us go, we shouted, our voices united in strength, and the light exploded outward, flooding the park with warmth and safety. For a moment, I felt invincible, the weight of fear lifting as we pushed back against the shadows. But then, in a flash, Alex lunged forward, his dark form surging like a tidal wave, threatening to overwhelm us. I gasped as the darkness enveloped me once more, squeezing the breath from my lungs. No! I cried, struggling against it. We can't let it end like this. But deep down, I knew this was the moment of truth. I had to confront not just Alex, but the deepest fears that resided within me. I had to face the reality of my past, the pain I had hidden for so long. Together, I shouted, rallying the children around me. We can do this. We can face him. As the darkness closed in, I summoned every ounce of courage I had left, focusing on the light that had grown within me. I felt the warmth of the children's hands clasping mine, their determination fueling my resolve. Face the darkness. I yelled, the words echoing in the void. Face the truth. With one final push, we released the light from our hearts, flooding the darkness with a brilliance that shattered the shadows. The darkness shrieked, the sound piercing and chilling, but we held our ground, our bond unbreakable. Let go of the past. I cried, pouring every ounce of strength into my words. You have no power here. As the light expanded, I felt a shift within me. The shadows began to dissolve, retreating under the brilliance of our collective resolve. I stood firm, my heart racing as I faced Alex, determination flooding my veins. And then, in a blinding flash, the darkness vanished, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of peace. The park shimmered with light, vibrant colors flooding back into the world. The laughter of children rang out, filling the air with joy as the shadows retreated into nothingness. In that moment, I knew I had won. I had faced my fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged stronger for it. I had not only reclaimed my past, but had also forged a new future, one filled with hope and resilience. But as I took a breath, a thought flickered through my mind. While I had faced the fears of my past, the journey was not over. I had to continue moving forward, embracing the light and the darkness, and learning to coexist with both. We did it, the girl in the red dress shouted, her face radiant with joy. Yes, we did, I replied, a smile breaking across my face. Together, we are unstoppable. As the park filled with laughter and light, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The shadows may have retreated for now, but I knew that as long as I faced my fears, I would always find a way to rise above them. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.